So welcome, good morning. I'm Roberto Zangrandi, Secretary General with EDSO, and hosting this first session of the 10th edition of InnoGrid.
Yeah.
So let me give you some housekeeping rules for this event, that is the annual appointment on European innovation in power networks. We are running it since 2012, marking the close and fruitful cooperation between DSOs and TSOs. And for the second time, we are organizing this event as an online webinar due to the ongoing COVID-19 measures. This year's edition is entitled Living the Transition. We shall highlight here the fundamental role of networks in the energy transition, and this event is organized on 2 days, today and next Friday, the 11th of June morning, when we shall showcase some of the leading research and development projects in Europe. Some housekeeping rules for our webinar, and you have them displayed on your screen. As a participant, you will be invited to interact through the Slido platform, and the link is in the chat. And you can go to the Slido website and enter the access code IGRID 2021-1. Please post your question on Slido only, the conference, and indicate your name and that of the company you're coming from or the institution you represent, along with your notes. We shall pick up the questions at the end of each intervention, and we shall answer them or bundling them in order to optimize the time availability. You can also follow the event highlights on Twitter, and the hashtag is IGRID2021. You have all the hashtags at the bottom line of your slides, and it will be now our pleasure and thankful honor to give the floor to the Energy Commissioner Kadri Simson for her keynote speech. No need to introduce Kadri Simson. She is our Energy Commissioner since 2019 in a very determined and successful way. Madam Commissioner, you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. We are looking at a fundamental shift in our energy system. Every aspect will be impacted in some way. But when it comes down to it, there are three main trends I see: decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalisation. Each poses a challenge, but each is also an opportunity to help move towards our climate and energy goals as part of the Green Deal. A climate neutral Europe by 2050 and a reduction of at least 55% in emissions by 2030. If we get these three right, not only will we reach these goals, but we will reach a fully integrated energy system. Last July, the Commission presented its strategy on this very topic. Our vision is a modernized and modern integrated system that is more electrified, more efficient, more flexible, and uses infrastructure more wisely. And it's also a system that involves renewable and low carbon fuels, especially where we cannot electrify as easily. So as these trends underpin our future energy system, I want to go into detail on each one for you today. First, decarbonization. We know that the production and consumption of energy is responsible for the vast majority of emissions in Europe. And so logic dictates that there is no credible path to climate neutrality without decarbonizing our energy system. In this new decarbonized world, electricity will be the most important energy source. It is set to meet around half of our energy demand by 2050. And compare that to around a quarter today, and you realize how far we need to go. And the pace of change won't be even. In certain sectors, electrification will be very fast. In households, for instance, we foresee the share of electricity in total energy consumed increasing from 26% to 41% by 2030. So how do we get these higher numbers? Europe is expected to double its installed capacity of renewables by 2030, moving from around 420 gigawatts in 2020 to 840 gigawatts by 2030. So it won't be all plain sailing. This new context will bring new challenges as well, ensuring that the grid can absorb this volume of electricity will be one of the biggest. It will require major investments in grid reinforcement, including cross-border between European countries and with our neighbors, but also at local level. These kinds of investments should form a key part of the recovery and resilience plans being submitted by EU member states, and they will go a long way to not only decarbonizing but also driving economic recovery beyond pandemic. Second is decentralization. New technologies for producing and storing energy, especially at a decentralized level, will change the way we produce energy. We will need new, smarter ways to manage our energy system to ensure that supply matches demand at all times and to keep down costs of the energy transition. Flexibility in innovation and investment is key here. This particularly applies to storage, demand response, and more flexible electricity generation units. Inevitably, consumers will have an essential role in achieving flexibility. We want to see passive consumers transform into active participants, developing demand-side flexibility provided by consumers across Europe can dramatically reduce total energy costs. Demand-side flexibility is both an extremely valuable resource to the European electricity system and a remarkably untapped one. We estimate that with a proper policy framework in place, demand response can account for 57 gigawatts by 2030, thus reducing peak demand and the need for backup capacities in the electricity market. It is in our interest to support demand-side flexibility, but flexibility will not develop on its own. It needs to be rewarded, and we believe that the best tool to do that is flexible prices, which signal where and when electricity is most needed. Storage solutions, demand response, and flexible generation can develop quickly if market prices reward consumers and generators. Increasingly, electricity will not be seen in isolation, but rather as fully integrated with other sectors of our energy system. The entire energy system will contribute to greater flexibility in many ways, whether that's through the rapid deployment of electric vehicles, heat pumps, smart district heating systems, electrolyzers for the production of hydrogen, or more electrified industrial processes. And the third trend I mentioned is digitalisation. The opportunities are vast. A more efficient management of energy networks, data-driven energy services, the integration of distributed renewables in the grid, and again, increased participation of energy consumers in the energy transition. There is a lot of positive that we can address in the upcoming digitalization of energy action plan, as announced in the energy system integration strategy. But as we digitalize our system more and more, And as a larger portion of renewable electricity capacity will be connected to the distribution grid, they become more vulnerable and exposed to new specific threats. Protecting our critical infrastructure will be even more important and even more complex all at once. This requires a greater focus on resilience. So last December, the Commission adopted a package on cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, and it includes a new ambitious EU cybersecurity strategy, a legal proposal for the revision of the Network and Information System Directive, and a legal proposal for a new directive on the resilience of critical entities. The package includes a framework to support member states to ensure the resilience of vital sectors, including energy. Within this framework, we are currently considering dedicated complementary energy-specific initiatives to further enhance the resilience of our critical energy infrastructure. We also plan to adopt a network code to strengthen the cybersecurity of cross-border electricity next year. And of course, that's not the only risk we face. The pandemic also tests our resilience of the electricity system, but I'm glad to say that there was no threat supply over the past year. Our system was resilient, and I want to take a moment to say thank you to the TSOs and TSOs. Thanks to your efforts in these difficult times, the system has proven its resilience under the exceptional circumstances. So these three, decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization, are the three big shifts as I see them, but they will not happen without a strong driving force behind them. Last year, we brought forward a number of strategies to consolidate these three trends across the entire energy spectrum, and from energy system integration to hydrogen, and from buildings renovation to offshore energy. Right now, we are preparing the legislative ground for our climate targets, and this is what we call the Fit for 55 package that we will adopt in July. And in total, it will have 12 legislative proposals, including the revision of the energy efficiency and renewable energy directives, and also the strengthening and extension of the emissions trading scheme, and the revision of the energy taxation directive, and a carbon border adjustment mechanism, among others. And later in the year, a second set of initiatives will follow in the energy field with legislation on hydrogen and the decarbonization of the gas markets, a proposal for reducing methane leaks, and one on strengthening the energy performance of buildings. This is one of the most ambitious policy overhauls in EU history. At the same time, offering us a way to tackle climate change and boost our recovery. To end, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that even though we are seeing huge change in our system, there is also one constant, the importance of networks. Today, your work underpins our energy system across Europe, and that is set to continue as we move towards the energy system of the future. The role of grids and system operators will be crucial in our success, and we count on you and your continued support as we move forward. Thank you for listening.
Dear Commissioner Simson, thank you very much for your words and for picking most of the topics that have characterized over the COVID year the work and the commitment of DSOs and TSOs alike. Now I would like to give the floor to Alberto Potocnik, who will be chairing session 1, Innovation versus Regulation, how to strike the right balance, or how to make regulation rhyme with innovation, a challenging topic. Alberto Potocnik is an economist with extensive experience in energy policy, regulation, and market design issues. Between 2010 and 2019, Alberto served as the first director of the European Union Agency for the Cooperation of the Energy Regulators, better known as ACER. Thank you, Alberto, for being here in your quality of Professor and Deputy Director of the Florence School of Regulation. It is a pleasure to have you moderating the first session here. And just a memo to all the participants and discussants in this session. When you see the face of Alberto coming up to the screen, please, that is a moral suasion, and you are asked kindly to organize the closure of your intervention. Alberto, please take the floor.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Yes, I can be even more persuasive. I will try to make sure that speakers stay within their allotted time, also because we have an interesting topic, but also we have a lot of contributions in this session one, which is about innovations versus regulation, how to strike the right balance, and how to make sure that regulation rhyme with innovation. I think my guess of the subtitle of this session is sandboxes versus toolkit, but let's see. And I don't want to take time because, as I said, we have a long list of very distinguished speakers. I will start immediately to introduce Christian Buchel. He is the chair of ENTSO. He's also executive board members and director for customers, markets, and territory at Enedis. And he, with Hervé Lafayette and Vincent Berrutto, will be presenting about regulation in power systems, hindering or stimulating innovation. So we start immediately with this trade-off of whether regulation is friendly to innovation or instead it's create barriers. So Christian, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Alberto. Welcome to all of us. Thanks, Commissioner Simson, for your very concrete and industrial-driven, prospective-driven, and supporting keynote. So it's always somehow a little emotion to open this InnoGrid session along with my colleague and friend, president of ENTSO-E. This 10th edition is beyond any doubt a clear and concrete milestone in the cooperation between our two grid industry, I would say, because at the end it's one industry, DSO and TSO together. We have gone, I think, a very long way, and we are about to go down even a longer journey in this cooperation. It has been said by Commissioner. In a few days, the EU DSO entity designed by the last electricity regulation will be holding its first official board of directors and general assembly. It will elect its president and vice presidents and start strengthening the expertise, strengthening the cooperation between DSO and TSO at a European level. The regulation, Alberto, you mentioned regulation. I think the regulation is precise. Quoting DSO and TSO have to cooperate, shall cooperate, with each other, especially in planning and operating their networks and achieving a coordinated access to resources. This is, in fact, we as DSOs, yes, within ENTSO-E, we think it's more than a statement. It's really an agenda for our industry. It is the responsibility of DSO and TSO alike to constructively contribute to this agenda in the footprints of what we have developed, very, very positively developed over the past years. DSO, we published recently studies about this. Yes, DSO are bound to invest 40 billion euro per year over the next decade to guarantee the energy transition and the social evolution linked to it. it is our gateway to progress and to go further. The electric distribution technologies and practices enable the society and the citizens to participate, to come into, to benefit from an involved electric power smart system. Investments around 400 billion euro by 2030. 400 billion euro by 2030 already represent a strong commitment to serve the energy transition. These gigantic investments is not a burden, it's a huge opportunity for the industry, a huge opportunity for Europe, a huge opportunity for our sovereignty in Europe. And this opportunity must necessarily be coordinated in terms of policies and regulation with our colleagues and friends from a TSO. Regulation and policy setting as a great role making most of these investments. In terms of regulation, we clearly need facilitated access to the EU funding and favorite investments in DSO grid in EU post-COVID recovery plans. We have made clear proposals on this because recovery is also an opportunity. Regulation should also pursue, along with us, TSO and DSOs, I mean, the establishment of a clear EU general framework for cybersecurity and data management. Commissioner Simson mentioned the cybersecurity question through the code we are currently writing. So with clearly defined roles and responsibilities for DSO and TSOs, we must now speed up the implementation of the clean energy package. We also expect cost-reflective remuneration and incentive models to enable the grid transformation while continuing exploring potential for flexibilities, which is a huge topic for today, but also and maybe probably more for tomorrow. We would like to see continued progress on tariff structures that optimize long-term power investments. I was speaking about 2030. We do need a clear signals through the tariff and the tariff structure, I would say. So those the value of these two InnoGrid sessions, hopefully for the last time by a virtual method, resides on the continuous joint engagement in designing the best way to implement our mutual contribution to the energy transition. So, dear friends, colleagues, all the stakeholders around the grid industry, I look forward for this fruitful discussion. And once again, thanks to Commissioner Simson for her words and engagement on to support our common efforts in this area. And I give now the floor to my colleague and friend Hervé. Hervé, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Alberto, do you want to? No. Thank you. Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you, Commissioner Simson, and all the participants, the distinguished speakers, to join us in this conference. It's a real pleasure to open it together with ENTSO and my friend Christian for the 10th time. And I want especially to acknowledge what the very kind words that the Commissioner said about how we just went through. I hope it is behind us now through this pandemic crisis. Thank you very much, Commissioner. InnoGrid is one example of the strong cooperation ENTSO-E has established with the European DSO Association. And of course, we look forward now to working closely with the new EU DSO entity. First slide, please. Next slide, thank you. The transmission and the distribution interface is, in my eyes, cornerstone in enabling a more sustainable, more digitalized, electrified, and consumer-centric system, which will integrate more and more distributed resources. Electricity and TSO and DSO cooperation is important in the context of the EU Green Deal, which represents a fundamental, it was already said, transformation of our society and economies. Electricity has a role to play in decarbonizing other sectors and thus contributing to the climate neutrality objective. Reaching EU climate objectives will require the European power system to evolve towards what we call in our Vision 2030, one system of interconnected systems. Different functional levels need to be working together, from the physical grid, the system operation, the market, the interlinkage with other sectors, to the digital layer. But also different geographical perimeters, from the local to national to European and even pan-European when it comes to transmission. In this system of systems, TSOs and DSOs will strengthen their role as facilitators in close dialogues with policymakers and stakeholders as well. The shift of this new paradigm of a network of multilateral interfaces that are coordinated will require undoubtedly on top of the physical structure, and will require research and development and innovation effort in power transmission and distribution. And I'm very glad that this session is to discuss how to discuss appropriate incentives to go that way. Next slide, please. As the professional association of independent and neutral regulated entities acting under a clear legal mandate, ENTSO-E serves the interests of society by optimizing social welfare in its dimensions of safety, economy, environment, and performance. So ENTSO-E is fostering the cooperation of European TSOs in many different levels, including innovation. You have on the screen a summary of what is our research, development, and innovation roadmap 2020-2030, which was released last year, and which is an effort to leverage the latest technology trends, the expertise of TSOs in planning, system operation, and market facilitation, the inputs of stakeholders, and the goals given by the policymakers. The roadmap contains 6 flagships, which, in line with our Vision 2030, address the key topics of today, such as deep electrification, system integration, asset optimization, market design, unlocking the potential of distributed resources, interoperability, and HVAC/HVDC integration. Later today, speakers from ENTSO-E will present the more in depth what is behind these chapters, this head of chapters. With the roadmap and other research and development and innovation work, ENTSO-E aims at strengthening cooperation of all stakeholders and facilitating the pooling of innovation in Europe. TSOs invest in many innovative projects, and some of those will be also featured in the second InnoGrid webinar on the 11th of June. Next slide, please. And now I will come to my last point, the need for the TSOs and the DSOs of being appropriately incentivized to invest in and deploy innovation in order to reach the ambitious objectives we have for 2050, for instance. The debate this morning is about what regulator frameworks is adequate for bringing innovative solutions to the market. So far, most of European regulatory frameworks only remunerate capital-intensive activities. However, many innovative solutions rely on non-capital-related costs, which are subject to efficiency criteria. Sometimes TSOs do not even fully recover this cost. In a recent position paper we have issued in April, last April, on remuneration frameworks, ENTSO-E is calling for a clear and coherent regulatory framework that would intensify the development of and the uptake of innovation solutions by remunerating innovation activities through meaningful incentives, providing for specific ecosystem for rapid technological development and testing to increase technology readiness level and reveal potential benefits, ensure that the administration and coordination efforts to reach the needed funding and approvals do not impose additional barriers for innovation uptake and development. We welcome the fact that the Infrastructure Forum of 29 October 2020 conclusions requested for NRAs, ACER, and CER to follow on a holistic approach to develop a regulatory framework suitable to the use of innovative solutions. And we are ready, of course, to cooperate with ACER and national regulators to develop such a framework. I would conclude this speech by saying that in my eyes, electricity and innovation get along very well, since both of them have this particularity of being somehow mysterious and magical. Innovation, and it's a difference with the scientific process of research and development, can come in a snap of fingers sometimes, and this magical effect, I hope we will find a way to implement it in the next years. I thank you very much for your attention and look forward to interesting debates on this and other innovation related topics today. Thank you again.
You're muted.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Hervé. Thank you for co-opening with Christian. I'm sorry I couldn't introduce you, but I don't think you need any introduction as president of ENTSO-E. Now, I think there is a lot of already food for thoughts in what you and Christian said, but before we start the discussion, we still have a number of presentations, and I would just give the screen immediately to Vincent Berrutto. He's head of unit for innovation, research, digitalization, and competitiveness at DG Energy. So, Vincent, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Postocznik, and good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to attend this conference today. As Commissioner Simson said in her introduction, takes place at a very important moment when the Commission is working very hard on a legislative package to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. And this package aims at converting the Green Deal ambition into effective actions and in the long term enable the European Union to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. However, regulation is not enough, and this goal will not be achieved without a major acceleration in clean energy innovation. I'd like to quote the IEA here, which said almost half of the CO2 emissions reductions that are needed come from technologies that are currently at a prototype or demonstration phase. So innovation is essential, and I'm glad that this conference will showcase several successful examples of EU-funded projects that have developed innovative solutions to make our power networks fit for the future. And I should say that many of these projects have been co-funded under the Horizon 2020 program, and in that program we've supported more than 70 projects that have had many elements directly related to smart grid technologies. And previous speakers mentioned these kind of projects. The main focus area has been network management, monitoring, control tools, but we've also had projects on microgrids, high voltage DC and AC, or protection elements. And I invite you to have a look at the Bridge website, where if you want to get more information about all these projects, it's a wonderful source of information. Now, if I look ahead, and I know many people who are listening to this conference are interested in future support for innovation. So let me mention the new set of EU programs that will be available from this year until 2027. What we call the multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years, together with the new recovery instrument, will provide an unprecedented opportunity to support the energy transition. An overall budget of 1.8 trillion euro has been voted, and this is the largest EU budget ever in the in the EU, and in that budget, at least 30% of the funds will be spent on fighting climate change, and that also represents the highest share ever. I'd like to mention the Horizon Europe program, of course, which will be essential to stimulate research and innovation. The first work program should be published around May-June. We are reaching the last steps, hopefully before its adoption, and it will cover this year and next year, and all the activities related to climate, energy, mobility will be grouped in the same cluster to achieve synergies. And in that cluster, we plan to invest at least 2 billion euro for research and innovation in clean energy activities. And many of these activities are, of course, relevant for TSOs and DSOs. For instance, under the heading of energy system, grids and storage, we will be supporting research and innovation areas such as the integration of energy systems, high voltage direct current, reliability and resilience of the grid, superconducting system of power electronics, and many other areas. So for those interested, I'm glad to say that there will be an info day on the 5th and the 6th of July where we will provide more information. Meanwhile, and to finish, because I know we have got very little time, let me mention one innovation area which I believe is worth highlighting, not only because of its large impact, but also because it allows me to illustrate one of the links between innovation and regulation, and that's the exploitation of digital solution in the energy sector. As Commissioner Simson said, digital technologies can bring gains for each and every component of the energy system, from supply to demand. On the supply side, we've supported numerous projects that demonstrate that digital technologies can optimize the production of renewables, from predictive maintenance of offshore wind turbines to the fast detection and localization of problems in the electricity network. On the demand side, of course, as Commissioner Simson said, it's helping empower consumers. It makes building, transport industry more efficient. The applications are countless, but one is particularly relevant in today's context. It's the use of digital solutions to foster sector integration in the energy system. The digital technologies and solutions have a major role to play to help us plan and operate our energy system as a whole across multiple energy carriers, infrastructures, and consumption sectors by creating stronger links between them. But all this, however, implies to improve the interoperability and the sharing of data to facilitate the access and exchange of energy data between products and between market actors, TSOs, DSOs, but also other market actors which may enter the market. That also implies to put in place measures that preserve citizens' rights and increase their digital skills, measures that ensure data protection, cybersecurity, very important, and of course, we need measures that reduce the carbon footprint of ICT solutions. So with all these measures in place that often imply regulation, we can truly reap the benefits of digital innovations. And for that reason, we are currently starting reflecting on an action plan for the digitalization of the energy system, and I hope that today's conference will help us to receive inputs. And this is another reason why I'm so excited about this conference, and I'm looking forward to listening to the presentations. I stop here and of course remain available for questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Berrutto. Thank you for your contribution. Indeed, regulation incentives are not sufficient. You also need support, policy support. So we now move into the, if you want, more technical part of this session, and we looked at the issue of going from promise to practice, and with special reference to the ENTSO-E's research, development, and innovation implementation report. We have two speakers, Håkon Borgen and Professor Sonia Berlin. They are both from Statnet, and they are chair and convener of ENTSO-E Research, Development, Innovation Planning Working Group. So I don't know, Håkon, are you starting the presentation? Yeah. And then Sonia will take on. Excellent.
Thank you, Alberto. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I would like to open up just to say that the innovation in itself, we have already done a lot, but now it's time to accelerate. So I'm chair of the RDIC, which is the committee in ENTSO-E, which is dealing with innovation. And what we did last year was to really take one step further in order to align on the use cases and what we need in order to deliver a complete transformed society without any emissions in 2050. So we took a turn preparing for the energy transformation, and the objective is to accelerate the innovation development and its uptake by prioritizing what is important and taking use case approaches and focusing on our areas where we have the biggest challenges. And then we linked it into the time domain before 2030 first, and pave then the way for the energy transformation further down the road to 2030 to 2050. So these flagships is all about focus. So we have now aligned between all the TSOs in Europe what we think is important. And the approach is that we center it around the RDI activities. And these flagships, as mentioned by Javier, are then sorted into clusters, where the system of systems is one, the grid as a backbone is another one, and the cyber physical grid is the third one. And in these flagships, you will find then a lot of milestones, which is dealing with challenges such as interoperability of equipment, platforms, software, complex system, market design, modeling, and also regulatory aspects, as will be discussed today. Next, please. And in order then to deliver this, next step, because this was done last year, now is to be even more concrete. So today we will publish a report from ENTSO-E, which will be available from today, which is dealing with the implementation. So we will present today, and that will be done by Sonja a little bit after me now, the implementation report 2021 to 2025. And then we have sorted it into terms, midterm 23 to 27, long-term 27 to 30 on the ambition part, but also the very short term, the coming 2 years. And the approach will then identify into 12 project concepts where we look at, in particular, of course, clear outcomes, expected impacts, but also to prioritize on those who have the highest technology readiness level, because speed is important and we need to take up technology which really is just about to be ready to be used. And that is really what this is all about. And we need to cooperate with players, and it's a strong cooperation between the TSOs and the DSOs, but also actors, universities is really a key here. So that's at my presentation. I look forward for the discussion later, and I give the word to Sonja. Please, Sonja.
Thank you. As you mentioned, please go to the next slide. As you mentioned, Håkan, it is very important to speed up, but as everyone knows, human resources is probably the one of the scarcest thing that we have in solving all these issues. So what we have done in the ENTSO-E RDIC group is to look at what are now the projects that we could develop based on the challenges that we have, that we could realize all together, that we find that we prioritize as a team. Because, you know, as a team, you innovate better, and as a team, you reach the goals better. So for each of the flagships, we have identified between 1 and 3 project ideas or project concepts. And you see the flagships on the left-hand side, and you see the project idea on the right-hand side. So the project concepts that we have been developing, and there is in the implementation report, there is for each of this flagship, there is 1 or 2 pages description and what we mean. So there is much more information available than just the highlights. So we have identified the following 12 projects. It's about smart charging for large-scale electromobility integration. It's innovative models and tools for the multi-sector system operation and planning. It's a design of a pan-European cross-sector data model. We want to look into how to integrate flexibility, as we heard about. That is very important. But we also want to look at our own carbon footprint. So SF6-free alternatives, smart asset management. And then we have to look into how we, as was mentioned before, we will have a lot of new production, we will have increased consumption. So how are we going to do this in the grid? So we have to look at the development of multi-vendor HVD systems and power electronics. We have to look at the commercial offshore full-scale multi-vendor, multi-terminal HVDCs demonstrators, but we also have to look in then stability management for when we have a lot of power electronics in the system. We have to look at how we're going to run and the hybrid AC/DC systems, but also when you introduce new digitalization, you have to look at also at the threats that it includes, that cyber resilience, and of course we see the large challenges we see actually in our operating rooms. So we need to use AI, it needs to be secure, it needs to be robust, and we also need open source IT solutions for our future control center. So please show the next slide. So all of these project concepts, we have been looking at what we expect as the outcome should be and what the expected impact should be. You can read this for yourself in the report, but most of it will then go on methodology. We will try to have prototypes and demonstrators because we want to move a little bit to the higher TRL, as was said before, and all of them they will create impact on cost efficiency, security of supply, and accelerated transition. And as mentioned, 2 of them will have a special impact on our environmental footprint. So please go to the next. On the next foil, you will see how we have done this. We estimate that our capacity in the RDIC of starting new projects, which all of us knows is very requiring, is about 2 to 3 projects a year. And here we have prioritized the order in which we want to start a project. So you see it's 3 projects starting in 2021, 3, 4 maybe in 2022, 2 in 2023, etc. So here we see a good time plan. We see also there are some independency which we haven't taken care of in the planning. So next foil, please. So we would like you to do is, of course, read this implementation report, because this is our priorities from an ENTSO-E perspective, and we would be happy that to get this information out and also to get your feedback. For us, it's very important that the more people are actually working on the challenges that we have, the sooner we will solve them. So please look at the implementation report. It can give you some inspiration of the things that we need from an ENTSO-E perspective, and also your local TSO needs. And we would like to have your feedback. And the consultation period is from, as Håkon mentioned, from today until the 2nd of August. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Håkon. Thank you, Sonja. Quite a intense presentation and quite a nice teaser for looking at the report, which I'm sure we will all have pleasure of reading and possibly commenting. So now we've seen the work done and planned by the TSOs. Now we go to the DSOs, and Joachim Schneider, who is the chair of the Technology and Knowledge Sharing Committee at ENTSO, is also Energy Network Technology and Innovation at E.ON, will be presenting on technology and innovation sharing among DSOs. So Joachim, the screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleague, and thank you for the invitation to share some thoughts about technology and information sharing among DSOs in ENTSO. It is a super important topic in our daily work, and an absolute need being up to speed. And all the developments which have been shown by Commissioner Kadri and then Vincent Ruto have the need that we are up to speed and don't lose any time in covering latest technology developments and the progress in regulation. Next slide, please. Networking is the exchange of information and ideas among people with a common profession or special interest. And coming to this phrase, I have shown here some pictures to show you how we are working at ENTSO. One very important topic is having site visits, and you see in the upper part, you see 2 visits at PGE in Warsaw and Iberdrola in Bilbao, but there have been more visits, recent visits in Stade in Rotterdam and EDP today, Ederedes in Lisbon. And the key behind that is to see new technologies applied by the colleagues and innovation in real life and operation. Due to COVID, I must admit that we have been very restricted to have this kind of knowledge sharing about innovations in the DSOs in the recent 1.5 years. But we all are looking forward to continue with this fruitful work in the future. And besides the site visits, you can see some formats, what we are doing together. We have knowledge sharing days, and what is behind that? We have a special topic, for example, about data management and digitalization use cases, for example, in maintenance or operations. And then we have 10 to 15 contributions all across Europe and explain to each other what we are doing in these innovation fields. This is also a very special and very successful format. For sure, we have our technology committee and all the task forces, but that is an essential topic of being up to speed. And I must say, with all the developments which have been addressed by the previous speakers, this is one key topic for the DSOs across Europe. The next slide, please. Our core belief is that the knowledge shared is knowledge times 2. Who are we? We are above 30 DSOs across Europe, which are represented in the Technology and Knowledge Sharing Committee. And it's the association's reference point for all technology aspects related to smart distribution grids. This is where we started, but long years ago, but this is still a very lively and interesting topic. And we are having in view the EU energy policy developments and the interests of other relevant stakeholders. And as mentioned before, together with our colleagues from the TSO, we are working on 10-year network development plans, key topics like integration of renewables and e-mobility, market developments and flexibility. And this is also a very huge topic for the DSOs today. So this has changed dramatically in the past. If we have a look on our top priorities for 2021, and this is where we always have a focused topic with clear delivery of the different task forces on a short term, let's say, view for 1 year, 2 years to deliver reports, to do the knowledge sharing on actual and very important new topic. There is at first active network management, and we have started in the past with distribution automation, but today we are talking about flexibility use cases. We are talking about advanced distribution management systems. We are talking about voltage control in low voltage grids. So a lot of topics behind active network management, which are developing quite fast. We have electric vehicles, grid integration. We have data management and use, a very wide field in the digitalization area. We have cybersecurity and system security, the network codes, and the technology radar covering the future developments. So next slide. What we are doing there is having regular surveys in all these task forces covering new topics. And I'm just asking, Alberto, did you show up because my 7 minutes are gone? Then I'm going to speed up. So we have recent reports in all these task forces and a recent survey on electromobility, just asking where do we stand in all the DSOs with the implementation of electromobility in our own fleets. And what you can see here is one of the youngest developments, and with a survey, and you can see that we have a lot of distributed plug-in hybrids and also pure electric vehicles in the fleet, and also the estimation for the upcoming years, going from 62% fleet electrified in 2030 to 75 in 2040. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. Yes, sharing will enrich everyone with more knowledge. And the key topics here is learn from other experience, failures and success, and do not reinvent the wheel. And as the colleagues do on the TSO side, here the cooperation is key and so important to be up to speed in this dramatically changing times. And if you think about cybersecurity and the threats, and also digitalisation and data management use cases, you can believe me that the exchange of information, who is working on what are the key benefits, the major outcomes, is a major topic for us DSOs in ENTSO. And with this a small cartoon on the right side, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Thank you for your attention and looking forward for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. Thank you. There is also a lot going on the DSO side, as one could have expected. So thanks a lot for your contribution. We now move to the regulators. We had the policymakers earlier on. Now we have the regulator. We have Christian Zingelsen, the current director of ACER, on whether regulation could be the bedrock for innovation in Europe in the power system. Christian, the screen is yours.
Thanks a lot, Alberto. Let me check at the outset whether you hear me all right. Very good, thank you. I have learned from painful experience over the last 14 months to ask that question at the outset. So I have a number of slides, and I'll just say to the organizers, I have a bit of animation, just a little bit on the different slides. So when I say click, please, not yet, please go back. So if I were to have said click, please click, but if you'd go back one, thank you very much. Then we will get through it, and I'll try to do it in good order. I'll speak a little bit about some of the challenges within which infrastructure innovation sits from my perspective, or from a broader regulatory perspective, and also how a select number of innovation-related questions may appear from the point of view of a regulator, and I'll offer a few views towards the end of how regulation acts as an enabler or could act as an enabler, and where it might need to go a bit more going forward. And I'll just add here before we get going, I look forward to today's report launch from ENTSO-E, which Håkon and Silvio are talking about. And I think more generally, there is a good working relationship between the innovation or R&D side of ENTSO-E and several colleagues at ACER. That's my impression, at least. So with that intro, let's get going with a click, if you don't mind. Indeed, thanks. And I'll speak here a little bit about the role of regulation more generally in the context of an accelerated transition of the energy system. And I'll start off with a bit of regulatory scripture, if you'll allow that term, knowing that energy transition up ahead will imply an acceleration of efforts and therefore also of investment, and also of investment in innovative solutions. And this, in my view, highlights the need for some sound principles to play their full role, and some of them are listed here in terms of new efforts being cost efficient and effective, innovation very much needed, both on the technology side, but also on the solutions or even business development side, avoiding incumbent bias to the extent possible, and having the markets being a key driver with regulation as a key enabler. That hopefully won't shock that many. This is obviously not specific to infrastructure, of course, let alone infrastructure innovation related efforts within infrastructure. It's across the board, but I think it also applies to such issues. And if we click, The question then from this very general overview, which appears, is will that then be sufficient, giving some of the efforts up ahead? And here, one of the ways, I guess, in which that question poses itself is whether there is too much focus in the eyes of some, of, shall we say, short-term economic efficiency within the regulatory frameworks that we have today, and if so, is that to the detriment of some of the longer-term efforts needed? And if we click, I think the way that that question poses itself is given even more, shall we say, acceleration with this notion of a step change that we have up ahead. And I like to quote this particular sentence from the Commission's Energy System Integration Strategy from last summer, which really points to, shall we say, new approaches being needed if we are to go beyond, shall we say, incremental progress towards the 2030 timeframe. So that sort of call to arms, or that expression of step change, I agree with. And so the question poses itself, are we ready for that as such? If we click, I would say that this step change received a bit of extra amplification a few weeks ago with the much talked about net zero by 2050 roadmap put forward by IEA. It wasn't exactly the same thing as our other colleague was quoting from the IEA, but this is a recent report which speaks to investment needs to rise very significantly globally in many different areas, but certainly also in network investment. This is a global picture, but a similar call to arms applies for European investment in networks as well. And for me, this implies a few things sort of immediately first off the bat. And the first aspect that comes to mind is we are actually facing significant challenges already today in terms of network rollout. And so I would argue that these challenges require tackling already under a status quo type of scenario. And if we click, one of those aspects is a significant delay in rolling out what we call projects of common interest, and particularly for electricity related projects of common interest, it's permitting and the granting of permits, which shall we say, causes a significant share of those delays. So that is something which I would argue warrants addressing already today, and obviously in a scenario of accelerated efforts and investment in the future, that applies even more so. A second implication, in my view, is it makes sense, very much so in this type of context, to make even more optimal use of what already exists. And thirdly, there may also be a need, given these delays that we see already today, and which will, shall we say, accentuate, presumably in an acceleration build-out scenario, I think it would make sense to look a little bit beyond sort of traditional regulatory approaches as well. I'll touch upon those in a second. So if we click, in addition to these current challenges, scaling up will also take place in a situation of increased complexity, I would argue. First, there is significant system change, obviously with this centralization, decentralization mix being one of those changes. It'll be a mix of both, but how exactly it will play out remains to be seen. This was also touched upon by the Commissioner. So in addition to significant system change, if we click, there's obviously also significant technology change, somewhat linked to decentralized assets becoming more prominent, namely in terms of more dynamic and responsive demand-side assets. And again, I think that brings up perhaps also more competing options for the future in terms of solving various system needs. In addition to, these system changes, technology changes, if we click, there's likely also what I would call maybe sort of policy construct changes up ahead, like multi-jurisdictional, more shared resources models of the future spanning multiple member state governments. I think this was actually one of the priority areas identified in the top 12 of ENTSO-E's report that we heard about earlier. So infrastructure choices and infrastructure innovation needs will be defined within an interplay of increasingly complex systems and perhaps also with increasingly competing options for solving some of those needs. So if we click, part of this complexity going forward, as I see it on the infrastructure side, is to scale up, to invest more and faster, but then in the what and in where. And this has implications for a number of different things, but I think it also has implications for innovation efforts. And I've borrowed this figure from ENTSO-E, which is more related to adequacy, but I think it also speaks to this. Now, if we then relate it to this aspect, if you pose sort of the innovation challenge as a bit of an imperative, I think it's safe to say that that can take on multiple sizes and shapes, and I think it can be valuable to maybe disaggregate this innovation proposition a bit further, the broader message that we must innovate more, etc. Absolutely, but in what sizes and shape does that come? And I'll have 3 examples. One is advancing innovative solutions that help optimize the use of existing assets. Hello, Alberto. I will speed up. Good to see you again. Is important. And then, of course, from a regulatory perspective, the question comes how to incentivize that if indeed this adds to, say, system stress and perhaps also system risk. It remains important to challenge. It's an important challenge to address, in part because, as I said, there are significant delays in rolling out new infrastructure, so you want to optimize what you already have, and also because the current margins available, say, for cross-zonal trade are too low compared to the political objectives set. So this raises the issue of what is the appropriate regulatory framework for that, and maybe this is the issue of the right type of expenditure that Hervé Lafayette was talking about in the beginning. Another example is on future technologies and future approaches, where I think it's helpful to distinguish between different types of innovative actions. One is who applies the innovative solutions. Should the right solutions uptake be incentivized? I think that is a no-brainer yes. How about participating in innovation solutions? I think that would probably be essential if indeed we are to move, shall we say, from more theoretical model-based innovative solutions and put them into practice. Then you sort of have to get out of the lab and get into the grid, as some might say. So that is absolutely essential. And then the third question, which perhaps is a little bit more contingent, is do you then invest also from the network owners in different solutions? Maybe on the technology side per se, that's more for the companies who put value at risk in the market. Maybe on the solution side, that's more the role for the grid companies, as it were. And the final way of looking at these different sizes of shape, as I alluded to before, I think there may well be scope for wider innovation. This is borderline policy and regulation, I would acknowledge, but certainly if you look at significant delays already recurrent today, likely to increase in the future, permitting issues, local opposition issues, that may require this notion of benefits to be approached a bit more broadly outside a normal energy regulatory framework, perhaps. So on this basis, if we look at regulation and we can click as a current or a future enabler, I would just highlight a few elements in closing, and this would be my last slide, I would say to Alberto also. And if we click whether a regulation is an enabler or not, I would offer first, I think a shared view of the energy system's future is likely to be a prerequisite for strong collaboration relations between system operators and regulators, as more, shall we say, commonly accepted outlooks and uncertainties will help underpin the assessment of long-term value-added projects. And here our internal soundings with NRAs would suggest that this currently functions pretty okay. I say that a bit softly, and I would invite some of you, if you agree with that, but that's what our internal soundings with NRAs would suggest. Secondly, getting more of what already exists is important, as I spoke to. That can be demanding because it can explore the limits of the system, and so therefore we will need to have the right regulatory framework to reward such efforts, because otherwise why would it happen? And that spotlights whether current incentives are sufficient or whether we need to reassess those so innovative solutions can better compete, if you will, with classical build solutions which add to the asset base. And in closing, finally, whether it concerns current assets or future assets or new approaches, I think it is relevant to entertain new discussions on how to advance innovative network solutions. Partly this is about the CAPEX or TOTEX distinction, moving towards, say, more a total expenditure item. But as Hervé Lafayette was saying, there is also a need probably to move beyond this focus on whatever type of expenditure and perhaps focus more on benefits. This is similar to what is called output-oriented or outcome-oriented regulation, but I think it can also go a little bit beyond that in saying how one looks at concrete projects, for example, cross-border initiatives or the like, where the benefits are significant, but where costs are low or almost non-existent, and how to incentivize that then probably necessitates a look at how to share those benefits, including with the system operator who entertains them, because why should they otherwise be doing it. So all in all, certainly there's a fair amount of regulatory support and sign-off already ongoing. There are increasingly competing outcomes, which will likely require more shared understanding of energy futures. There is a need to enhance the efficient usage of what already exists. And finally, similar to more outcome-oriented regulation, there may also be a need to focus more on the benefit size as opposed to the type of costs. Sorry for exceeding my time, Alberto. You have come up 3 times, and I know I am 3 times, and you're out, as they say in the US. So I will close. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. No, I mean, just because we have still some one presentation, then we wanted to have some time for discussion. I think you highlighted the challenge of having effective regulation for innovation. But before we go to a bit of panel discussion, the final presentation is from Dolf Gielen. He's Director of Innovation and Technology at IRENA, and I hope he will be inspiring us by presenting what's happening in other continents for supporting innovation. So, Dolf, the screen is yours, and thanks a lot for joining.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alberto. And I'll try to make up for some of the time. I mean, the key message I want to convey today is that we think that we have the technology we need, but there is a challenge in a sense of how do we integrate that. So we need more systemic innovation going forward. That will be the critical component. And of course, we need to accelerate the deployment of these technologies. If we move to the next slide, Europe is making good progress on deploying variable renewables, but there are also other constituencies that make very rapid progress. For example, of course, California. But we work also, for example, with Uruguay. It's a very interesting case. But the whole power supply is already renewables, but now they're moving to electrification of the end users. Parts of China are very interesting. Of course, Shenzhen case is well known, but for example, we also work in Jiangsu, where the Winter Olympics will be, which is also an interesting case. So there is a lot to be learned from all these different cases. Moving forward to the next slide. The main trends were already repeatedly mentioned, and if we take the next slide, so what we really need is to activate this flexibility potential in the grids, and especially on the demand side, and that requires smartness, digitalisation, etc. But that also requires, for example, the right price incentives. And that is an example of the systemic innovation that we need. Moving to the next one. So if I say systemic innovation, I mean enabling technologies, but also combining these enabling technologies with the right market design and regulation. So that was already also discussed by a number of the previous speakers. We need in changes in system operation. And we see that especially also outside Europe, that, for example, transmission grid capacities are reserved for certain plans. If you can use that more flexibly, then you can integrate a lot more variable renewables. And we need also new business models. So again, Europe is doing quite well on that. In other parts of the world, there is still a lot of work being to be done on aggregators, peer-to-peer trading, and other aspects. We've looked at a lot of these innovations. The next slide. So we issued our innovation landscape report on integration of variable renewables. We recently completed our 30 innovation briefs. So we identified 30 categories of innovations, looked at best practices around the world for these specific types of innovations, and how you can combine them to find solutions, and we found broadly 12 categories of solutions. So I recommend you have a look at that if you want to understand better what's going around the world. And moving to the next slide, this is also a very dynamic field. I would say 3-4 years ago, we were starting to get the first questions about green hydrogen. Now everybody's talking about green hydrogen, and green hydrogen is seen as a core part of the solution. So you also need to have sufficient flexibility in your innovation strategy to allow this type of adjustments to changes in perspective and in technology progress. And it's the same in electromobility. So that's the next slide. Of course, everybody agrees that in the power sector, we're moving to electric cars. But there are still, there's a lot of focus on the car sales. There is some focus on the charging infrastructure. We think more could be done. There's absolutely not enough attention for smart charging and power systems integration. So, and that will be critical going forward. And another emerging aspect is also electrification of commercial vehicles. We think that gradually you will see that also to go to more demanding applications, and that has also specific aspects, also implications for the power system that you need to account for. And there is some best practice how to deal with these issues. And the final slide then on the investment needs. So these are our numbers. They are also, we issued our World Energy Transitions Outlook in March. So we see the electrification and infrastructure is a significant part of the overall investments. We need about $1 trillion to 20 trillion per year going forward to 2050 worldwide. And Europe is a significant part of that. So that concludes my initial remarks. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dolf. Thank you for, well, I guess, inspiring us a bit about what's going on elsewhere. Now, well, we have 3 minutes on the program, but I guess we can still a few minutes from the coffee break, because I would like at least to pick up on a couple of questions. I'm sorry we won't have much time to run a debate. Otherwise, we will be delaying the next session, which is as interesting as this one. But I would like to thank all the contributors. I have picked, and there were a few questions on Slido. I have to say, many of them, they're very technical, and I don't think that this is the place to run on very technical aspects. But maybe to Mr. Berrutto, I would like to ask whether how, because we've heard about incentives. Incentives are for private companies or private investors to take actions, but also we've heard that they're not sufficient, and you need some sort of public intervention, policy, etc. Now, how can we couple the public and private action in order to achieve the best results in terms of innovation?
Yep, thank you. I think we've seen a lot of figures now in terms of what we need to invest in the energy system to reach the 2030 and the 2050 goals. And I think it's very clear that we need to use public funding to trigger private investments. And we need both public and private investments, and large amount, or around 350 billion a year, to reach the objectives. And I think I've talked a little bit about the programs that exist and which provide grants to innovators and other market actors to help them come up with new solutions, including in the for transmission and distribution, of course. Horizon Europe, of course, is a big source of funding with more than 95 billion euro. But I think we have to look also as how we can use the public funding to leverage private investment, and then I think it's interesting to see how we can de-risk investment through the InvestEU program. I think it's worth mentioning. I didn't have time to mention it, but it's very interesting because with a EU budget guarantee of 26 billion euro, we want to back the investment, and we aim to mobilize more than 372 billion euro of public and private investment. And that I think is a very interesting area. It's starting now. One of the windows under InvestEU has been designed specifically to use guarantees from the EU budget to crowd in other investors in the field of research, innovation, and also digitalization. And I think this window will be quite interesting to stimulate innovation in the energy system. And that's 25% of the whole program. So that we're talking about nearly 7 billion euro, which is available. And I think that's quite a significant amount of money which could be used. And that's a way to use the public funding to trigger large-scale investments from the private sector.
Thank you very much. Now, maybe I'll combine two issues, and then I will ask all panelists, or a few of them, but I will leave it to you to decide if you want to intervene. I think we have 5 minutes at most, so try to be brief. Two questions. Performance indicators for DSOs. If we want to have incentives, we need to have performance indicators, especially in the area of innovations. And also whether the tariff system can provide the right incentives for new technologies and new facilities on the demand side, which can also be promoting innovation. So I don't know whether Christian, being issues of regulatory nature, wants to start, and then I will take three contributions, 1 minute each, and then we have to close.
Thanks. This is Christian. Christian Siglason, the other Christian. Thanks. You can hear me a bit.
Oh, sorry, no, indeed. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I'm Christian. He's Christian. So I could have a very brief go in a few seconds. So on the last one, the tariff system, I think that is a key component. I did not touch upon it in my own intervention, but I think that is right. Looking at how tariffs can further those, shall we say, system needs, which seem to be clear and almost no regret. And that could be, I guess, time of usage related tariffs, and shall we say, getting to the right mix of volumetric and capacity oriented type tariffs and the like. This is obviously a longer discussion and also a long-standing academic debate, I think, in many quarters, but certainly that is part of the puzzle in terms of the broader framework. I would agree. I'm assuming you agree with that as well as Berto, but that I would agree with that. And yes, performance indicators would be significant if one moves, shall we say, from a more cost orientation type framework to a more output orientation type framework. And I think there are some examples of performance indicators out there in practice in different jurisdictions. I have some experience a while ago where I think some of the regulated entities were perhaps did not find the construct of performance indicators completely fit for purpose. So maybe there is, shall we say, innovation work to be done in terms of how to construct performance indicators as well. I would offer that in the very brief time, and leave it to others to come in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wanted to come in on either of these topics? Please switch your camera on. Okay. Christian.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks to all the contributors. It was very interesting presentation. I think we have clearly seen that we are speaking about the one system. Yes, it's no more silos, customer silos, territories, technology, innovation. It's one system, and I was very interested and very happy, Christian, from Acer, that you mentioned the question of OPEX, CAPEX, yes, which is an important question for us because we invest more and more, not only in copper, but in IT, in technology, and the way we handle these investments and the return of these investments is not the same in IT and copper, and we have to see it, and you mentioned it very clearly, to see it as one system. I'm very happy, and thanks for all those who contributed to this roundtable.
Okay, I think this is the time to close. I have to apologize with Sonia, who will be moderating the next session, because we have stolen a few minutes. I have written 3 pages of notes, but I don't want to go through them. Otherwise, you lose any opportunity of having coffee. I just thank all the contributors. I think it was a very interesting first session of this conference. I think there's a lot more to be done in terms of enabling innovation and research behind it. So I guess now there is a short break, and then Sonia will start.
Yes, Alberto, I would like to invite the audience to take a small break, and please be back at 11 sharp when I shall reopen the proceedings and give the floor to Sonia Tuhig. See you then in 5 minutes. Alberto, thank you for your moderation. A pity, not too much time, but it was very, very interesting. And see you in 5 minutes.
Hello. There you go.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning. Sorry, can I check my audio, please? Thank you.
We can hear you well, Sonia.
Great.
I can hear you and
Thank
see you.
Very good. Okay.
Good
morning,
Sonia.
Robert.
Hi, Sonia.
Hi.
Also, just wanted to double check if everything is fine with my.
Yeah, if
audio.
I could ask all the panelists to show. Good morning, Roberto. How are you?
Hi, fine. Happy to see you.
Good to see you too. And if I could ask all the panelists to show their video and also speak. Thank you. So Robert, Paddy, good morning, and Mikael and Oko.
Good morning, Sonia. Hopefully you can hear
Hi.
me.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Paddy. Yeah.
Everyone.
Paddy, your lighting behind you is creating a little bit of a shadow on your face. If there's some way of not having the lighting in your background, in your backdrop, maybe to shut a curtain or to, yeah.
Suddenly bright, I'll shut some blinds.
Surprisingly, surprisingly, my camera is working.
Yeah, I'm good. Good to see you, Robert. Yeah.
Yeah, I am in a different location. I have the day off today. It's a bridge day between the Corpus Christi and the weekend. So I am.
Cool. Good, Michael, Mikael.
Hi, Sonia. Hello,
Hi.
everyone. Hello, Roberto, and everyone.
Yeah.
Hi,
hello.
Michael.
Good to hear you. So Jan Oko, is Jan Oko online, or Oko Ziegler? Not yet.
Just checking if he's in the attendees.
Thank you. So I'm going to just run through each bio. I will first say who's in the panel, and then just before each of your presentations, I will go through your bio, and then I'll hand over to you. So then when the presentation is on, we will all turn off our videos except for the person who's presenting. And then, of course, once we start the Q&A session, we all turn back on the videos and the audio. Yeah.
Yeah. My optimism regarding camera was too premature, because it's being switched off after a minute. So apologies for that.
Well, we will do a quick job until 11:30. So hopefully we get there, as they say. Yeah.
Oko is on the line. I don't know if he can just maybe switch on his camera and speak, so we can test everything is okay.
Oko, can you hear us? Can you speak, please? Could you give Oko a call, Claire? Because yeah,
yes,
Oko is first. Otherwise, I will if we haven't got that connection.
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Oko.
Sorry, I'm here.
Thank you. No problem. Just you were giving us a little panic there, Oko, but now we're okay. Okay, so it's good to see you all. And when we start now, you can tell us, Roberto, when to start, or Claire. I will introduce each of you just briefly, and then we will do your bios just before each presentation. And as we agreed, when we finish the presentations, we do the Q&A. I will be keeping an eye on the Slido, and of course, then we will. I'll pose one question to each of you, but in the posing of one question to each of you, I'd allow others to react to it as well in a brief way before we move to the next question. So a maximum of 4 questions in all for the Q&A, if that's okay with you all. And then we finish, and thank you for your participation. So you will give us the cue to start?
Yes, we are about to restart. So please, Claire, could we go back online?
I think it's Roxana. I was managing this.
Oh yes, sorry, Roxana.
Yeah, no worries.
We are online.
So welcome back to this InnoGrid session. It is my pleasure now to give the floor to Sonia Tuhe. Sonia has been appointed as ENTSO-E Secretary General at the end of 2020. And welcome, Sonia. It's your first InnoGrid as a Secretary General of ENTSO-E, and I hope one of a longer series. And yes. Before taking anyway the role of Secretary General, Sonia was head of Operations Section at ENTSO-E Secretariat, and has supported the European TSOs in the implementation of the EU network codes and regulation, and the furthering of a regional coordination initiative among the TSOs. And she is coming from an actual TSO, so she thinks that she has been serving in several senior management positions for the IR Group of Ireland. Sonia, you are most welcome. It will be a pleasure to have you around for a long time, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Roberto, for such a warm welcome, and good morning to you all. We're very delighted to co-host the InnoGrid conference, and as Secretary General of ENTSO-E, I'm proud to support and lead this session. So session 2 is a very interesting session. Its focus is on power system flexibility, the who, the what, and the when. And I'm joined today by a very nice, interesting panel with Jan Oko Ziegler from the ETIPSnet, from Paddy Hayes, who is from ESB Networks and is also a chair of the platform for TSO-DSO, from Robert Peprosky, who's also coming from ENTSO-E and is also for ENTSO-E leading the platform with the TSO-DSO group, and Michael Villa from SmartN. So I welcome to you all. What we will do now is we will have an individual presentation from each of our presenters, and of course then we will do a Q&A at the end. I would like to remind you about Slido, which is where you put in your questions, and of course the most popular questions we will try to pose to our panel at the end. Yes, we have until 11:30 for that. So without further ado, I first introduce Jan Oko Ziegler, who is Head of Market Studies, Global Infrastructure and Networks at Enel. Aside from providing expertise as chair of ETIPSnet, he is also vice chair of the Innovation and Research Committee of ENTSO, member of the Nomination Committee of the new EU DSO entity, Italian member of the Distribution and Market Facilitation Committee of Eurelectric, and coordinator of the Global DSO platform. I welcome you, Oko, and I give you the floor to present your slides. Thank you.
Many thanks, Sonia. Many thanks to all of you for participating. Good morning, all. Yes, as Sonia rightly said, I'm currently honored to chair the European Technology and Innovation Platform that tackles smart networks for the energy transition. That is ETIPSnet. So we elaborate the strategic research and innovation roadmap regarding grids. And so if we go to the next slide, what I wanted to cover today is basically the value of flexibility itself, the technologies that allow us to enhance flexibility, the service types behind that, and that's basically where we address the who, which is the flexibility market development under construction in Europe. So as you see here, we have powerful drivers, because we are, as we all know, living through this energy transition triggered by the decarbonization trends, obviously, but we also have prosumers, active consumers coming more and more into scene. Obviously, there is the revolution of renewable energy sources ongoing. If we just look at the ratio that we had, like say 2015, of basically 80% centralized power production and an additional 20% on average in the EU of renewable sources, this trend by a little later than 2030, will be basically inverted. So that is a tremendous stress on the grids, which were designed differently, obviously. And on top of that, we also live through climate change, which causes, I would say, a few requirements as to the resilience of the grids. Last but not least, as drivers, we also have smart sector integration. So it's not only about the power sector itself, but basically the integration with sector coupling, heat, gas networks, etc. So all this requires ever more flexibility to balance all these changes and forecast errors within the power system. Next slide, please. So how are we going to address, thank you, these flexibility requirements? Obviously, one thing is grid investments, the other is also flexibility enhancing technologies. We see basically four large categories here. The flexible generation, and that can be provided by basically all renewables, obviously, but also fuel cells, gas or hydro turbines. Then interconnectors, there's a huge potential, interconnectors between European countries. Storage, within storage, we also have pumped hydro, for example, and again, there is a significant potential. I'll show you that in two small graphs that will follow, and obviously demand side response. So if we could just jump the next slide and go to the one after that, please. Yeah, there we go. So if we look at pumped hydro storage, we have here, I know it's difficult to see, but if you just say, we look at the very light blue, that's where we are today. And everything that is a bit darker is the potential from now on. And you see that there is a potential of 40 to 50% on top of the currently existing installed capacity. And that is on a sector that is not easy because of its environmental impact, like pumped storage. But already such a sector shows a potential of a 50% increase. Next slide, please. Thank you. Interconnectors, it is even much more promising. Here again, the light blue dots in the bottom compared to the dark blue dots on top, it's basically almost a 200% increase. So the potential of cooperation amongst EU countries in terms of power exchanges is tremendous. We can do much better than where we are today. Okay, now please jump back 2 slides so that we can address the flexibility service types in the EU. Another one. There we go, thank you. So the who is playing this game? Basically, we see obviously active customers becoming ever more prosumers. Also, if they obviously become enabled, and that will depend on the smart metering deployment, so that we have other tariffication possibilities than only peak and off-peak for sure. But this implicit demand side flexibility then triggers independent aggregators. Obviously, from single residential, this potential of flexibility will get accumulated through aggregators. Then to wholesale services that decrease the sourcing costs, and constrained management services that coordinate the flexibility transactions, adequacy services, and balancing services. I won't go too much into this because I think it's more the what than the who, but I wanted to show you that there is many service types allowing many different service providers and players to enter the game. Okay, please jump the next 2 slides that we already saw. Next. And next. Thank you. So as a conclusion regarding the who, we observe first trends in Europe because obviously this flexibility market is under construction. It's really very interesting to watch what is happening. So as I said, one thing is to enable more and more active customers to allow them their implicit demand side flexibility through smart metering. That is ongoing. There is a common trend in the EU regarding balancing services that are more and more open up to demand side flexibility and aggregation. And then there's obviously a variety of models implemented in different countries. So basically you have either a tendency to a more aggregator plus balancing service provider market model, or rather constrained management service provider, which is the case, the later is the case in countries like UK, Belgium, France, Netherlands, which are cited in the study of USEF, the Universal Smart Energy Framework. But also there's countries that they didn't analyze. I might just indicate Italy is following here the French model. So there is some lack of standardization, obviously, in this phase of testing and of initial implementation in several countries, but there is very high potential savings for flexibility regarding grid investments and resilience, which the EU is basically indicating as a potential of 5 billion euros per year of savings. I see your figure, Sonia. I stopped here. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Later.
Very interesting, Oko. Now we move to Robert Peprowski, who has been with PSC, the Polish transmission system operator, for 25 years, being involved in long-term planning, market implementation, and operations. He has spent half of that time being responsible for Polish power system operation, and he is a member of the ENTSO-E board. Welcome, Robert. Over to you.
Thank you, Sonia. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to explain you a little bit the what part of the flexibilities and how the transmission and distribution interface and the cooperation between TSOs and DSO can unleash it. Moving to the next slide, I would like to come back to the basics, because there is of course a lot of discussion around about flexibility. And I think sometimes it's good to come back to the basics in terms of the definitions. So the flexibility, we should be aware that this is just simply the ability to move up or down generation or consumption if the consumption is active. And so far, that was more or less a normal feature of the generation, especially at the transmission level. Including also storage, which can move up or down generation and consumption. That's a beauty of the storage. There have been also some active demands which are used mainly in the emergency situations if the let's say generation or storage is not enough to cope with the flexibilities. But so far the flexibility was not the big issue because there was enough resources to provide it, comparing to the needs. I mean, comparing to the needs which are in the system. So I have not mentioned interconnections, which you have just heard from Jan Oko, that this is also this can be also treated as a source of the flexibility, but from the TSO's perspective, one shall be aware that interconnections, of course, support flexibilities, but of course there need to be also a generation of active demand or storage behind the interconnectors. From the synchronous area perspective, so from the whole interconnection perspective, basically the resources are, as I said, controllable generating units, active demand, and storage. Of course, the larger the interconnector, the better, because then we can pool all those resources. And the transmission capacities between the individual systems allows us to send these flexibilities around. That has been so far. So moving to the next slide, we can I think you have already seen this figure in the presentation of those this morning, which shows that we are with the energy transition. We do have quite a big change as far as the flexibilities are concerned. This is because I'm not going to talk about the details of the energy transition, because we have heard a lot of that in more or less each of the presentations before. But the point is, from the flexibility point of view, is that the controllable generation is being replaced by the non-controllable one, because the renewables, mainly wind and PV, are the sources which basically operate according to the, let's say, fuel. That means the wind speed and the fuel availability. I mean, the wind speed and the solar intensity have the priority dispatch, so they are operated as the maximum as they can produce. And so we have much less, in case there's a high wind and PV production, we have much less controllable generation, which can provide flexibilities. And furthermore, we shall be aware that wind and PV, the predictability, even though of course we're working hard to have the right forecast, it's really the uncertainty of the output of wind and PV is larger by at least the order of the magnitude of the uncertainty which have been coped with so far in the power system. I mean the uncertainty of the load forecast. So both together mean that with high integration of non-controllable renewables, we have more and more needs for the new flexibility sources, and that's why we need to look for the flexibility sources down in the distribution grid, which has not been needed so far. So these are the areas when we need to explore, and because then we can find out flexibilities in the controllable generation embedded in the distribution grid, but also in the active load, especially the new load like the one coming from the electromobility or the heat pumps. But of course, the new sources connected to both transmission and the distribution also are helpful, especially and not only regarding the active demand, but also regarding the reactive demand or inertia. And that means, and this shows my last slide, please move to that one. And that means that the operation of the transmission distribution interface is going to be done in a completely different way. We are now already experiencing that. We are moving from so-called one-way operation. So when electricity flows from transmission down to the distribution to satisfy the load, the demand of the customers, now we have more and more two-way traffic on that interface, and we have much more volatility in that respect in the future. So that's why we need much more advanced cooperation between TSOs and DSOs on this interface, as far as the exchange of the operational data is needed. We also should be aware that we need more and more resources down from the distribution grid necessary to balance the whole system, to procure necessary reserves and to manage congestion not only in distribution but also in the transmission. So this advanced cooperation between TSOs and DSOs is needed not only in real-time operation and operational planning, but also in the long-term planning activities to prepare it. And finally, I would like to mention that the operation of the transmission distribution interface has been traditionally basically a local issue. I mean, within each member state, it was driven by the historical arrangements there. But obviously with the integration of electricity markets across the whole European Union, now we have also the European perspective of that. And at this point, let me stop and pass the floor to Paddy, who will provide you more details from the distribution perspective on the same issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert, and a very nice introduction to Paddy Hayes. Our next panelist. Paddy has been the Managing Director of ESB Network since 2018. Prior to this, he led ESB Generation and Wholesale Market Business. Paddy is a member of the board of ENTSO and is currently co-chair of the European Distribution Transmission Cooperation Platform. Welcome, Paddy. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Sonia, and good morning from Ireland. Thanks also to Robert for the introduction. It's my privilege to be involved with Robert and with Michael Jesberger, as Sonia said, in the Distribution Transmission Cooperation Platform, working very closely with ENTSO-E and of course EDSO, Eurelectric, Geode and SEDEC as well. And this is really important because strong cooperation and sharing between transmission and distribution in the area of distributed flexibility is increasingly significant. And as you can see in my next slide, or my first slide, Robert has talked about the what aspect of this, and I'll talk more about the cooperative aspect. But I think we're all aware that the primary driver for this is Europe's commitment, our commitment to the clean energy transition, and that means significantly higher amounts of intermittent renewables connected both to our transmission systems and to our distribution systems in the years to come. And as a consequence then, as Robert was setting out, there's a growing requirement for the flexibilities necessary to accommodate this. And we estimate that of the order of 60% of the flexibilities that are required by the transmission system operators ultimately will have to be provided by distribution connected resources. And so the importance then of the cooperation between distribution and transmission is evident. In my next slide, you can see that increasingly we see the distribution system as an integrator of renewables. We estimate that more than 50% of renewable generation will be directly connected to distribution ultimately. Also as a provider of stability to manage increased volatility, and going back to Robert's point, as a conduit for flexibility to the transmission system, which again underlines the importance and the growing relevance of network codes for the distribution system operators and the increasing importance of the DSO-TSO network planning and cooperation. You can see in the next slide a reference to the mandate for DSOs and TSOs in relation to cooperation with each other, but not only in the planning and operation of our networks, but also in order to achieve this coordinated access to resources such as distributed generation, energy storage, and demand response. And that means working together to get common positions on the design of congestion management products. As Robert said, both the management of congestion, the reduction, elimination of congestion in distribution networks, but also in transmission networks. It means working together on transparency, the transparency and the visibility of system needs and requirements at any stage, both immediate term and long term. Things like the use of sub-meter data, but also access to the locational informational assets such as flexibility resource registers. So, and as you can see in my next slide, developing compatible systems and approaches is going to be key to exploiting the full flexibility potential. TSO and DSO worked together and created an active management, an active system management report back in 2019. This section of InnoGrid is about the what of flexibility, and that report defined flexibility, if you don't mind me reading directly, as the modification of generation, injection, and/or consumption patterns in reaction to an external signal, whether that be a price signal or an activation, in order to provide a service within the energy system. And that report clarified that that flexibility can only be used efficiently if the right coordination mechanisms are put in place and the appropriate data and information are exchanged between DSOs, TSOs, and customers and market players. So unleashing this flexibility potential means equally respecting the roles and responsibilities of each party, with consideration, of course, as Robert mentioned earlier on, to the different realities across different parts of Europe, but aiming for an efficient allocation between the different uses of flexibility. And of course, besides the cooperation between transmission and distribution, it's also really important to have cooperation with market parties and cooperation with consumer organizations to make sure that we get the development of the engaging market models that are going to be required in order to attract in the providers of that flexibility. So moving quickly to the final slide, there's enormous potential for renewable generation in Europe. And in order to harness this potential and lead the clean energy transition, we're increasingly going to require to engage demand side flexibility and distributed energy resources. So naturally, progress on demand side flexibility has been a key pillar of the distribution transmission cooperation platform's current work program. It builds, as you can see on the slide, on a really strong foundation and history of cooperative and collaborative work. There's been deep engagement between transmission and distribution experts on this subject over a number of years. And I think the increasing depth and extent of the engagement reflects the increasing importance of distributed flexibility as we look forward to our low carbon future. Right now, the joint task force of the joint DSO-TSO task force on distributed flexibility, which is moderated by Torsten Knopp and Fabio Genuese, they plan to deliver a roadmap to Acer and the Commission by July. That roadmap will propose the concrete next steps on the development of the rules regarding distributed flexibility and the interaction between transmission and distribution. The working group, really importantly, held an external stakeholder workshop in May, reaching outside of the expert group, and there was acknowledgement there of the work that was done by the joint task force to propose these concrete next steps and common principles, and taking that cooperative approach to distributed flexibility much further. This report in July, it'll be the culmination of 6 months of really strong cooperation between a group of 14 experts from ENTSO-E, Eurelectric, EDSO, Geode, and SEDEC. And I'd like to just take the opportunity, if I might, to thank them for their contributions to the important task and to acknowledge the commitment of that group in bringing this really important area of cooperation forward. Working together on the frameworks for distributed flexibilities will optimize the benefit of distribution connected resources for the whole system, both distribution and transmission, and of course for all our customers, and probably most importantly of all, for Europe's clean energy transition and for a low carbon future. Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Paddy. Very interesting role there between the DSOs and TSOs, and quite a bit of work that's going on. We will now have our final presentation from Michael Villa, the Executive Director of Smart Energy Europe since 2018, and in the past he has worked as senior consultant to provide specific advocacy support to clients both in the EU and the Middle East in the energy sector. He has a master's at the Institute of European Studies in Brussels and a bachelor degree from Catholic University of Milan. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks a lot, Sonia. And I'm Executive Director much more recently, from January. I was in Smart Energy since 2018, but this role from January. Thanks a lot for this invitation, and I'm really happy to have Smart Energy represented at InnoGrid Conference 2021. Just allow me to also give some preliminary comments. I'm glad to hear from my predecessor, for the previous speakers, remarks on the role of active customers, on the role of distributed resources to provide flexibility and increase system efficiency. Also, as mentioned before by Occo, the 5 billion euro savings that could be achieved annually from an activation of DSF at distribution level. My intervention indeed would stress in particular the contribution of DSF and look at this time dimension, the when, as was requested. Allow me in the next slide to indeed briefly present Smart Energy, who we are. Indeed, it's a European business organization integrating the consumer-driven solutions for the clean energy transition. We are gathering multinational, scale-up, startup, offering smart technologies and data-driven energy services to really enable all end users to activate their demand side flexibility. So in the next slide here, the question that I was asked to reply, are we moving fast enough? Well, no. Still no major increase in the demand side flexibility activations. Assets, however, are deployed. Services like aggregation services are reliable services, but there is no major increase in demand side flexibility activation because still there are no proper regulatory frameworks to enable these. The barriers are still there, even if they were correctly tackled at European level through the electricity market design. I really like the intervention by Christian, the ISR director, saying let's make the most of what we have already. And I really want to give a few examples of an optimization, a possible optimization of existing assets. Now, if we look at our buildings, so residential, looking at the residential level, it was calculated by Delta E that we are already having 200 gigawatts of already installed controllable load assets, and I'm referring in particular to HVAC systems or hot water boilers that could be indeed flexibility providers. And these 200 gigawatts are also going to increase, and it was estimated that an additional 65 gigawatts will be installed in the next 4 years. So a lot of resources on the ground, but how many of these already installed resources can already offer flexibility services? Very few. And the same is also another example is in the transport sector. We are seeing a steady increase of EV market development, but how many of these batteries can be charged in a smart way? very few once again. So we look, and in the next slide, indeed, I would like to present the main, some outcomes of these studies that we did ourselves, and also with Delta E more recently in March, to really look at the barriers that are currently present in all member states that are limiting the uptake of demand side flexibility. And really, delays in the electricity market design implementation means slower demand side flexibility activation. So indeed, we looked at 4 different dimensions of key provision of the electricity market design. And if we look at the first map, it's quite worrying, the message that the situation, the status quo, because indeed, with regard to the market-based procurement of all demand decentralized energy resources by system operators, well, the situation is quite worrying, in particular at TSO level. Still, there are no national frameworks to incentivize and adequately remunerate DSO to procure flexibility. The situation is a bit better at TSO level for the market-based procurement of all decentralized energy resources by TSO, in particular for ancillary services. With regard instead to the second dimension, so the non-discriminatory participation of all decentralized energy resources, all markets and mechanisms, in balancing markets, a lot needs to be done. We have relevant limitations, in particular to the participation of aggregators. It's also the case in Finland, where it's somehow more advanced in that sense. For balancing markets, we have still major barriers in countries like Spain and Italy, where only generation units can actually participate to balancing markets. And in the UK, we cannot even mention it, describe it as a market, but more a mechanism where the TSO has its own discretionality to accept bid and offers. The situation is a bit better for day-ahead and intraday markets, in particular in countries like France, Finland, Italy, Romania, and Slovenia. Still, a lot needs to be done a lot in countries like Greece, Ireland, Spain. In general, the bid size is double than what's foreseen by legislation, that is indeed foreseen 500 kilowatts or less. And aggregation also in these markets, day ahead and intraday markets, is still limited in countries, in relevant countries like, for example, Germany or the UK. With regard to the framework for innovative services, indeed, if I've already mentioned somehow, but indeed there are no specific framework for demand response aggregation, no major provision adopted yet, except of France. So it's a limiting factor. And with regard to the access to price signals for end users, dynamic electricity price contracts are reality in more countries. So it's this implicit side development is a bit more advanced in others. In the next slide, and I will conclude, are our 6 pillars, 6 recommendations on how to move faster enough in that sense. So first of all is correct implementation of the electricity market design, have targeted amendment of existing legislation also at European level. For example, the EU Utilities Directive, where there are provisions for the procurement limits to the procurement of real-time for DSO, that also needs to be tackled for the sake of consistency with the implementation of the electricity market design. Develop a dedicated network code for demand flexibility. I would spend a lot of time, but indeed it's important to fill the gap or clarify some of the issues that needs to be from the electricity market design through this network code, in particular for the product design, the aggregation framework, the harmonized procurement, in particular at TSO level, and also the incentives to procure flexibility instead of a capex approach, as it was already mentioned before. And then last but not least, also keep deploying and integrating decentralized energy resources, in particular in buildings and in transport sectors, and then develop revenue streams to reward the active participation to the clean energy transition through, for example, dedicated products for demand side traceability, and then last but not least, promote prosumer business models. And we think that real-time 24/7 guarantees of origins would incentivize end users to consume renewables in a flexible way. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Michael. And now I invite all the panelists to show their video, and we just have a Q&A session. Perhaps, and thank you to you all for excellent presentations. Perhaps I can start with the TSO-DSO interface. A question that's being posed is what are the challenges in terms of enhancing flexibility between the TSO and the DSO? And a specific question from Slido to Paddy. What kind of interfaces and specific institutional cooperation will be needed to coordinate the TSO-DSO common market operation regarding flexibility? Will it be necessary to have further roles? So maybe if I could ask Paddy and also Robert for your reactions. Thank you. Paddy, would you like to react?
Yeah, sorry, Sonia, I was just trying to unmute. I think this is it's not obvious to me now that there's a role that needs to sit between transmission and distribution. So, and I think in a way my own perspective on that is that would just potentially add another layer of complexity to what's going to be an increasingly complex space. So I think probably the really important thing, and this is what the joint task force on flexibility is looking at, is making sure that we have the common arrangements for visibility and transparency between the system needs in transmission and distribution on the one hand, and the availability then of flexibility on the other, both in the short and long term, so that the transmission and distribution can cooperate with each other. My concern about inserting another party in the middle of that, if that's the suggestion, is that that other party would then have to communicate. You know, have three parties inside that communication space, and what's going to be a very dynamic and developing area. So look, that would be my perspective. This is about getting clarity, a nice framework for transparency, understanding of the information and what information goes where, and then a forward understanding of the requirements from both of the system operators, both distribution and transmission, in relation to their flexibility needs.
Thank you, Paddy.
Maybe Robert has a...
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can add to that from my perspective, my personal perspective, I also do not think that we need another party to manage that. I believe TSOs and DSO can do so. They basically need to cooperate much more than before. That is obvious, and we have tried to show up together with Paddy. I do not believe that we can put all the resources at the transmission level and the distribution level to one basket and then fully optimize it. That would be the most perfect solution, but I am really doubtful if this is technically feasible from the IT point of view, because the complex systems we currently have on the transmission level to manage the power systems, when you have hundreds and maximum thousands of active market participants, then we would need to move to millions of them, and then I do not think this is feasible to manage it from the IT perspective. What I believe personally is that we should basically go into the direction that the TSOs are supposed to manage the power system on the transmission level, and DSOs on the distribution level, and they basically optimize the resources which are connected to them. There is, of course, the disadvantage of that you do not optimize everything, but I think, as I said, this is not technically feasible in my opinion, and this disaggregation to the transmission and distribution level will make it feasible, and then of course TSOs and DSOs can exchange the resources to the extent which is needed on the interface. And personally thinking, that's, in my opinion, the solution of that.
Okay, and Michael, maybe I could ask you to sort of speak to both Paddy and Robert in terms of incentivization of flexibility is their responsibility. What would you ask them to do more of? Yeah.
When Paddy in his presentation was saying about the need of TSO and DSO to cooperate for a coordinated access to distributed resources and cooperate with market players also in that sense, it's really the direction to go. And profit of the reliability of aggregators with multiple mixed portfolio of different decentralized energy resources that could indeed be provided to the different system operators. So this is the way to go, and indeed to engage with market players in that sense.
Okay, and maybe a final question to Oko. Oko, as a ETIPSnet chair, you of course are there to maximize the innovation that's there and available to us. What do you recommend, again, to our panelists here today in terms of the portfolio, the right approach to the portfolio from an innovation perspective? What do you recommend here? Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Yeah, well, basically, I can start catching upon what has been recently discussed amongst dear colleagues, Paddy, Robert, and Michael. So yes, we in ETIPSnet, we follow the same idea of trying to find an agile way of optimizing the DSO-DSO dialogue. So there is actually a working group within ETIPSnet dedicating its time to studying the idea of such a one-stop shop platform. So it should be easy to handle, though, as Robert rightly says. So it's everybody doing his homework well, and then just joining to exchange the most crucial information in order to have an interaction that doesn't require a third party to interfere. So that's work concretely being addressed within one working group as an example. But then obviously at ETIPSnet, since we are in charge of elaborating the strategic research and innovation roadmap, and also in particular then shorter time frame implementation plans, we tackle 6 research areas, and one of them is specifically dedicated to flexibility enablers and system flexibility. So it's really a matter of regarding demand flexibility, generation flexibility, which I discussed earlier, but also storage and energy conversion flexibility, networks and transportation. We have a lot ongoing currently regarding e-mobility and vehicle to grid.
Okay, and maybe if I could have reactions then in terms of this one-stop shop. Yeah, Michael, do you agree? Do we need a one-stop shop and everyone working together with their own roles there? Yeah.
I think that there are different schemes that could be exploited, but it's important to have interoperability of marketplaces with also data exchange platforms, which is extremely important to indeed valorize and activate flexibility. If we are not bridging the gap and allowing this horizontal, vertical integration between marketplaces and also with data exchange platforms, whatever will be the structure of these data exchange platforms, then we are not able to use and profit of the resources of data, sorry, of the distributed resources to be activated in the most cost-effective way.
So I'd like to thank all my panelists for today's session, very interesting, and of course to enjoy the rest of the session. So thank you to you all, very interesting, and we will now finish this panel session. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and all the panelists. Excellent discussion here as well. I am in dire straits now to tell you the truth, because we had foreseen a possible second break. But what I do propose you, since our members of the third panel are already there, to skip it. You just had a coffee, as a matter of fact. And if you agree, I would take advantage of these extra 10 minutes and call on the screen the next session that will be moderated by David Peters. And a few words about David is one of the first time you see him around. David joined Stedin of Netherlands in 2015, and he is covering the position of a Chief Transition Officer and member of the Stedin Group Executive Board since 2018. He is also EDSO board member, and he is a physician and studied also applied ethics at KU Leuven University. And his title is particularly interesting, and we are rather curious in his chairing of this session, and the fact that maybe, David, just to introduce yourself, one word, what actually does a Chief Transition Officer? Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Roberto. Hello, everybody. My main task, I can say that in three areas. The first one is the digitalization of the grid operator. So that's a big task where I'm focusing on to facilitate the energy transition. The second big task is our investment portfolio. As you all probably can understand, the uncertainty in the investments are larger due to the energy transition. So that consumes a lot of time. And the third area where I'm focusing on as a transition officer is the interaction with municipalities, interaction with the government to make sure that we can facilitate the energy transition as we should do. So I'm working on the transformation of the DSO based on what the energy to facilitate to make the energy transition happening. So that's what I'm doing every day. And system integration is a big thing in this. I think so. I'm really looking forward to this session. You can ask the questions in Slido, as you can see the code down here. And I will ask Lucy first to come online. And then I will introduce her.
Good morning.
Are you there, Lucy?
Yes, I'm here.
So, as Roberto told me, I studied in the Netherlands and in Leuven, and I probably after this hour I should take some classes on my pronunciation of a couple of names. So I make excuses already up front, but it's well meant. So Lucy is director of the European Green Vehicle Initiative Association, and she will give us the opening statement of this very interesting session. And Lucy, before joining the association, she has been a part of FP7 consortium for more than 5 years in drafting and managing the research projects. So welcome, Lucy. I suggest we start. The floor is yours, and I will check the questions, and we will come to that in the panel discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much, David, for this introduction. Thank you also to the organizer for inviting EGVIA to make this opening speech. I'm very pleased to be in the meeting with you today. Good morning also to all participants. As you all know, we are at a turning point today in energy and also in transport sector. To achieve the decarbonization in road transport sector, we need to implement really major changes in the way we will move both people and goods in the future. Within the European Green Vehicle Initiative, which will soon turn into the 2.0 partnership, we are strongly committed to make transport greener and cleaner in the future, driven by key policies defined at EU level, including, of course, the European Green Deal, but also the sustainable and smart mobility strategy. To be successful in this transition, working solely at vehicle level will not be enough. If we want to reach the 2050 goals, we really need to invest today in research and innovation activities, and we need a strong acceleration by 2030. And this will require a truly system approach. That's why I'm so happy to read the title of today's session, Moving Up a Gear in System Integration, as this is exactly what we are aiming at with the 2.0 partnership. I think I have one slide. I don't know if we can see it on the screen now. So as you can see, with the 2.0 partnership, co-programmed partnership, we are aiming at bringing really a significant contribution to achieving the objective of Europe having the first carbon neutral road transport system by 2050. We also want to ensure technology leadership and European competitiveness in order to support economic growth and job creation in Europe. All our activities will aim at developing solutions for the benefit of the user. We really want to put the user at the heart of what we will do in the 2.0 partnership, also in the view of improving quality of life of the European citizens. To achieve these four main objectives, that you probably see also very well connected to the Green Deal, we structure our activities across four main pillars that you should not see as separate activities, but really pillars interacting very strongly with each other. Of course, we will continue investigating new vehicle technologies and vehicle propulsion solutions, both for battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. That will remain a major aspect of our activities. And as we've done up to now in green vehicles, we will continue to work on all types of vehicles from L categories up to heavy duty. What is new is that we will also cover the integration of battery electric vehicles into the energy system and the related charging infrastructure. We will develop innovative concepts, solutions, and services for the mobility of people and goods. And we will also implement life cycle approaches and circular economy for the sustainable and innovative road mobility solution. I just want to stop for a minute on the second pillar, which is probably the most interesting for the audience today, the integration of battery electric vehicle into the energy system and the charging infrastructure. This is really a critical aspect, as the vehicle without proper infrastructure will never be able to meet all the user requirements. We identify some challenges as priorities in this area. I guess this will not be really a surprise for the audience that is very well experienced. I just will give a very brief overview of what you can expect in this area and the challenges we see for system integration in the 2.0 partnership. If you'd like to get more information about the content of the pillar and a more detailed presentation, I invite you to join the lunch meeting we are organizing next Tuesday on the 8th of June, where you will have the opportunity to get more information. I take the opportunity to thank the co-leaders of the second pillar of the 2.0 initiative, and also ETIPSNet and colleagues from associations at active at European level that extensively contributed to prepare the document, and it was very well appreciated and a pleasure to have you on board. So the key challenges we identified in this second pillar, and we see really as most important one to work on in the upcoming 7 years in a collaborative approach, again, really not see these challenges being only tackled by the second pillar, but really integrated with all the other aspects that I mentioned. Of course, there will be, as first item, the development of seamless solutions, allowing the infrastructure to be easily accessible, available at any time, and also having charging time responsive to the different users' needs. We will also work on new technological developments, such as smart charging or vehicle-to-grid solutions, to create a flexible, sustainable, affordable, and efficient charging environment. Interoperability of charging infrastructure will be also a very important aspect, enabling different charging solutions to satisfy multiple user needs. The improvement of charging planning, thanks to digital solutions, to give the customer an accurate and real-time perception of the final cost of the services will also be a very important aspect. And ensuring power quality is also something that we will look into. These challenges can only be tackled by acting together. Stakeholders from the transport world, of course, from the energy sector and from many additional sectors will need to work together. But we also need a strong involvement from the member states to deploy the necessary charging infrastructure. We set ambitious targets, but a lot still to be done to achieve the Green Deal objective of 1 million publicly available charging points across Europe. To conclude, I would simply say that moving up a gear in system integration is not an option. This is what we need to do all together to be successful.
Lucy, thank you very much for your interesting opening statement. What I suggest is that we do the discussion after all the individual presentations. So hope to see you in a couple of minutes again to have the discussion. And welcome, Antonio. Welcome with us. Antonio works for the Italian TSO Terna, which he represents in several international organizations. But I think very interesting in here, Antonio, you were the convener of the working group Future Energy Systems, and you contributed as a main author to the position paper on the electric vehicle integration. So I think you're very well equipped to take us with the into the system integration from your perspective. I want to give you the floor, and let's start.
Thank you, and I'm very glad to be here in this InnoGrid, talking about one of the aspects of flexibility and sector coupling. We have studied as ENTSO-E what are the issues and the solution for the optimal integration of electric vehicles into the power grids. And the next slide, we see that we have developed and published this position paper, because electric vehicles are here to come. It will be probably very fast. It is general consensus, only the trajectory and probably the speed of it. But in Europe, they will come, as well as they are coming in China, United States, in other places. And we think that the missing part is the charging infrastructure. And I'm very much in agreement with what Irina Dolph-Gillen was showing before. One of the results of these studies is the same, because as you see also on this graph, the charging stations are being installed in apparently a large number, but the point is, if you own an electric car, you don't need only one. So there is a threshold. You have to develop a system of an infrastructure of charging, which has to be initially developed at a faster rate than EV vehicles itself. In the next slide, we see that also the technology of the charging, yes, the previous one is there already, but what is missing is the system view, and especially to see how this charging can be very optimally used for both a win-win solution for the user and for the system. We are particularly looking at the so-called slow charging, you see here with red circles, because actually the slow, it actually longer time parking cars, because the batteries can be used for longer time and with more versatile and flexible load profile, both in charging and discharging. Although there is a lot of research and push for fast charging, because this is what the user is wanting. But if we look at the system, we will need both fast chargers when you are on the move, but also smart charging when you are standing and your car can stay idle for hours or even days. So in the next slide, we see that initially we thought it was more a DSO issue, because most of the electric vehicles will be charged in the distribution, will be connected distribution. But when the number becomes 10 millions, tens or hundreds of millions, the aggregate of this has a huge impact at system level. So both for our scenarios, we have to plan the grids and the system with the proper scenarios. We have to plan for it, and then we have to operate. So all the aspects of normal activities of TSOs are and will be especially more involved. So the electric vehicles, and we are talking especially of the battery operated. There will be some going with fuel cells with hydrogen, but for sure the main part will still be with the batteries, which is the one which is connected to the electricity system. The fuel cells are not, even if the engine is electric. So they represent a new load, a new type of load profile, and in the same time a new flexibility resource to be optimally used by DSOs and TSOs together. And we have seen that the grid operator point of view was not well enough addressed in the large debate which is going on. But we think the time for action is now, because if the infrastructure of charging develop without being smart, then we should go for retrofitting, as we've done for in some cases for some PV at the distribution level, which will be for sure not optimal. Go next slide. The paper is published. I will just give you some hints here, but you can find it on our ENTSO-E website. We made a sort of a classification, let's say taxonomy of use cases under the perspective which is interesting to us. How is the grid impact, in particular, how can we use this kind of charging according to the user and to the kind of utilization he makes in relation to the capacity of using it as a flexibility means. And you see that we have here a sort of classification. If you go in the next slide, all these use cases will be deployed. So we have to look at all of them. There are solutions differentiated by use case, and taking into consideration this paradigm shift that except for extra urban or eventually long truck, long delivery for trucks, but most instead of the charging will happen totally differently from what it is now, not on the move, but when you park. So we have to look what are the parking facilities and couple the parking habits of the drivers with the charging needs. So it is important to find this, develop this solution to be very useful, very attractive for the drivers. They have to be stimulated, motivated, rewarded, because of course it will be done on a voluntary basis. The fact that you give your battery to be charged by a system, it's not only you to decide when you plug in, when you plug out. The next slide, thank you. So what we see is we found that it is not an adequacy issue in terms of energy for the system, because overall, even if most of the electric the vehicles will become electric, this doesn't pose an issue of too much energy to be supplied, but it is an issue of load profiling. Typically, if all electric vehicles would decide themselves when to plug in, probably they will go to increase the ramp in the evening, which is already a problem for the TSO and DSOs. The next animation, thank you. We see that if we apply smart charging, unidirectional, just use a load, a charging profile which is optimal to the system according to the deficit or surplus of energy flowing in the system, which should also be reflected by the market prices. Already just with the smart charging unidirectional, you can shave the peaks, and this is a clear benefit for the system because you have less peak generation plants and less grid to be grid lines and stations to be built. But if you go even to vehicle to grid by allowing bilateral bidirectional energy changes, you couple, actually not you couple, you sum the effects, the positive effects of having a storage, because this battery is a scattered mean of storage which you can use in different location, in different amount, in different timing, and also demand response. So you have a double effect, demand response plus storage. So it's a very powerful means for flexibility, a special one. Next one, slide, thank you. So there are many opportunities going from reshaping the power load curve, which is always beneficial, but also you can manage grid congestion, both at distribution level and at the transmission level. You can avoid overload on distribution grids and optimal plan the new grids development, which is always difficult in these days to build new lines. You can use also in some cases reactive power for voltage control in distribution grids. You can better use the overgeneration of renewables, and this is going towards decarbonization. You can you can get ancillary services for transmission grid operation through appropriate market mechanism, and you can also optimize behind the meter. Typically, if you are a prosumer with photovoltaic and battery in the car, you can optimize even behind the meter. And we don't forget that we will have hyperchargers probably in highways for heavy duty vehicles. In the next one, we arrive next to the conclusion. Thank you for changing slide. So one big issue, one big point is we need a lot of cooperation with actors which are outside the typical power sector. This is true for all sector coupling initiatives, but in this case we don't only couple with the transport, with the car manufacturer, but also with the urban planning for all, because we have to plan, ideally to co-plan the charging infrastructure, also with the building sector, because we need to have chargers in the offices and in the houses, and also the battery industry, which has to be equipped for this kind of vehicle to grid control charging, and ICT. ICT will be important because as we can see on this customer-centered graphic on the lower part, the customer has needs and expectation. The car is primarily to move. We look at it as a moving battery, but it is the customer expectation is to save money, but also to have a good service to give you the share control on his battery. And probably we have to develop new services both for the vehicle and for the driver, the owner, so that it can be a win-win solution. And we arrive to the final message in the next slide. And thank you for the next slide. So some key messages. First of all, there is an ecosystem which is very wide and very articulated, and grid operators are not in the center here. We look at this as a very interesting storage plus demand response precious service, which, by the way, can be used only paying back some OPEX and some losses of energy when you use the battery, and maybe some tear and wear because you have more cycles. But mainly the CAPEX is already paid because you use it for the transport, for the car itself. So should be also a low-cost and optimal solution. We would like to promote to integrate to have an integrated planning for the new grids development and the charging infrastructure. We strongly support that smart charging, and specifically vehicle to grid, whenever it is economically convenient, be highly prioritized. Cannot be say the default, but highly prioritized. And there are some enablers. We need the standards, interoperability, and there is a lot to be done on data access, data privacy, data management in general, and new digital service. Of course, this will be also reflected from updated market design and rules with cost-effective tariffs, and considering also where there are grid constraints, so the batteries can be more useful to the system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antonio. Very interesting presentation with very interesting graphs in there. I must admit that I have to promise myself to don't dive into the questions and keep them for the panel discussion. To all the people, you can ask questions in the slide. I haven't seen any questions so far, so please ask them so we can use them during the panel discussion. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you very much. We are moving now to Francesco Gerli. He's the CEO of Inareti. And a small note from myself, I'm very interested in this presentation because we are all aware of the integration of electrical vehicles to the grid, like we discussed in the previous presentations. But for me, system integration is not only about integrating new vehicles on the grid edge or rest on the grid edge, but it's also about getting the energy system between electricity, gas, and heat, etc., working together to optimize the full energy system. And that's why I'm very happy to give the floor to Francesco and take us through your presentation, please.
Thank you, David. Good morning to everybody. You can show the slide, please. Okay, next one. Okay, just some second to the overview of A2A Group. We are the biggest Italian multi-utility involved in environmental services, power generation, power energy sale, and energy distribution. I mean gas, electricity, district heatings. Next, please. Okay, these are our energy networks. We work mainly in the north of Italy, in Lombardia, and with two big cities, which are Milan and Brescia. You can see the area for electricity, gas, and district heating grids. Now I'm going to show you in the next slide for 5 minutes our experience focused on Milan. We recently, last year, did a very deep and peculiar analysis in order to get an optimized networks investment plan. So in order to watch what happened in our infrastructures, looking at the mega trends we spoke about for all the morning. So this is this chart shows you the process of our analysis. Starting from the left part, you can see what are the factors we analyzed. So the network uses and area characteristics like network capacity, trends and population characteristics, and the type and quality of buildings. The external drivers, I mean the national policy, the regulations, consumer preferences, technology and climate change, and the change factors, and I mean obviously mobility, demand response, power to gas, renewable gas, and so on. In the boxes, blue and red one, you can see what we get before and at the end. So we get a change in demand for different vectors, the required capacity for different networks, for different vectors. So we got the gap or surplus in the different infrastructures. And starting from this, we could start to do an optimized networks investment plan for next 10 years, more or less. We did this through two different and integrated approach. A top-down approach, and I mean to transfer the mega trends on the area of Milan and get the results, and a very peculiar bottom-up approach in which we divided all the city area in more or less 80 small areas studying in a specific way what happens on the single parts of the grids. Next, please. Next slide. Thank you. This is the result of our top-down analysis. You can see here the as-is situation as far as the energy mix is concerned, and what we got about 2050 situation in Milan. I don't want to go into the single detail, but the message of these charts on the right part, you can see the different mix of the vectors between now at the moment and the 2050 situation, and you can see the electricity is increasing, and district heatings too, with increasing of heat recover, and the gas consumption is falling down in our prevision. Another important thing is the total consumption is not growing up. This is because of efficiency increasing in consumption and for example, in buildings insulation, thermal insulation too. And this even if in the 2050 photography, you have also the electric mobility, which is not included in this situation. Next, please. Okay, while this is the electrical peak evolution, which is increasing in a very important way, as you can see, our provision is in next 30 years. We could need an infrastructure with a more 50% of capacity in order to have the capacity for the summer peak of power, the power peak. Next, please. Okay, this is quite interesting. This is an example of one of the small areas we have studied in a peculiar way. In the chart, you can see every tower is a single medium voltage, low voltage substation. So that we have in this area more or less 90. We have 6,000 in all over the city, all over Milan. This is 19 of a single area, and in every area we study the kind of buildings, the kind of population, and all the characteristics. Then we determine the evolution of consumptions, and you can see in the three different pictures the three different colors. The blue color means that the substation is adequate in capacity. The red one means that we are sure we need an investment in order to increase the infrastructures, which is something very difficult for us in Milan. Is very crowded and very energy high dense situation. So it's very difficult to have areas in which to build new plants. So the yellow color is a sort of average situation, because in our opinion these are the plants would need an increase in infrastructures, but where we can do something more intelligent, something of the smart ways my colleagues spoke before me. Next, please. So that now there is some bullet with our conclusion in integrating e-mobility, so that even if e-mobility will not represent a big portion of the electrical energy distribution for a number of years, its impact cannot be underestimated. In fact, a stupid medium power charging infrastructure is like a 20 apartment building coming up overnight in a densely populated city center and likely overwhelming power at peak time. And to accommodate the expected growth of the network must be stronger and the system must be smarter. The system is quite complex. I mean network charging infrastructure, car app, users, parking system, and so on, and each with very different levels of readiness. And interoperator planning and technological alignment will be key to sustain demand. Next, please.
Francesco, this is your last slide, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we have to.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay.
We go very fast from the last slide. Is there something? Can you go back to this one, please?
It's something I already heard before me. So if you want, we can stop here.
Okay. Sorry to cut you here, Francesco, but it's my job to do when necessary. Yeah. So I hope you forgive me. Thank you very much, Francesco. Very interesting study.
You're welcome.
I want to move on to Christian. Welcome, Christian. Christian has been working at Mercedes-Benz cars and Daimler trucks, and he's responsible for the liaison between the European utilities and logistic customers to enable the electrification of the transporting sector. Very interesting to have you over here, Christian, and to give the perspective from Daimler on system integration and the role of electric mobility, but then especially electric trucks on this. So please take the floor and go ahead. Christian, we don't hear you, so I don't know whether you're still on mute.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, it works.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, hang on. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, this is perfect. Go ahead, Christian.
Sorry about that. Yeah, and thanks a lot for the introduction, David, and also thank you to EDSO for inviting me here today as one of the grid users rather than one of the grid implementers. So I have to apologize in advance because there will be a lot of demands in this presentation and very little solutions, but hopefully we can work on that together in the panel discussion afterwards. All right, let's start with the first slide. I was already very happy to hear that Dorfgert already mentioned that trucks are also a part of this discussion and that are also quite interesting, and I totally agree. They're a bit of a different breed, both in their abilities and their requirements. So in terms of abilities, we're talking about large vehicles, large capacity to carry things, to being used, and they also need large batteries. So for example, we're talking about 300, 500 kilowatt hours, something like that. Different OEMs have different plans. And the first vehicles that we see here on this slide are already in use. So we have an innovation fleet that is on the road, both in Europe, but also in the US and in Japan. And for example, in all over these different fleets, we already have 10 million kilometers being driven by customers in their daily operations. So this is quite interesting to see. And a little example on the left-hand side, you see 2 Freightliner trucks in the US. And just as an example, one of our customers wants to install depot charging, so wants to install chargers at their site, and they need a new medium voltage transformer for that. And the utility that was transporting that transformer was also part of the innovation fleet and could therefore deliver this transformer with their electric Freightliner eCascadia. So that's quite a nice picture opportunity for my colleagues to show how these vehicles are being used actively already today. On the other hand, trucks also are a bit larger than passenger cars, so we really need to think, oh sorry, we're still on the same slide, really need to think about where they can charge. So I already mentioned depot charging, but public charging is also something to consider, and passenger cars just won't cut it, right? Especially if they have roofs and the trucks just can't get there. Cable lengths are limited. If they charge at passenger sites, they will block multiple passenger parking sites, so that will be a problem, and so we need different solutions here. Now, next slide, please. Thank you. I already talked about the innovation fleet a lot, but of course this is just the beginning. We want to be able to deliver the best vehicles to our customers, and they need those vehicles to be able to make profits and deliver goods to all over the place and for all kinds of usages. And one driver beyond these wish from us is also, of course, regulation. So emissions will have to be reduced by 30% in 2030, and that's quite a large ask, considering that efficiency is already very high on the list of the wishes of our customers. And on the right-hand side, you see a few pictures by ACEA. So the white line depicts the ramp-up of battery electric vehicles, battery electric trucks. And 270,000 can be expected in 2030, and that's only battery electric. That doesn't include hydrogen vehicles. You can look at the report to see the hydrogen numbers in there as well. This is a European statistic, by the way. And also, I want to mention a lot of the charging will happen at the depot in the beginning, especially in the beginning. But as soon as we're talking about trucks being used for long-haul distribution as well, not only the localized 200-kilometer range distribution. We have to look at very high charging powers again. As I already mentioned, 300, 500 kilowatt hours of charging of battery capacity will require very high charging powers as well, far beyond what we see at the passenger side already. And that's why we're seeing this light blue bit of column at the very top, with charging powers higher than 500 kilowatts. So this will be megawatt charging rather than, the CCS standard that we have at the moment, and that's being developed at the moment. Daimler Trucks has already promised to reach around 60% of their sales in 2030 by zero-emission vehicles, and that includes battery electric trucks and hydrogen vehicles. On the next slide, you can see the portfolio that we have in line to provide these numbers. And I want to start on the right from the furthest away, basically. So the Gen H2 on the right has been presented last year as a hydrogen solution coming to the market in the second half of this year and used for very flexible routes, very long distances. And in the middle, you see the BEV H2, the eActros long haul, which is a battery electric truck and will be coming to the market in around 2024. And that can be used for long range routes as well, but rather predictable due to the charging requirements, of course. And on the left-hand side, you see the eActros, which will be coming to the market in the end of this year. As you can see, it's a bit smaller because it's used primarily for local routes, so up to 200 kilometers. But that will really be able to deliver a lot of goods to us as customers already, as final consumers, basically. So predictable and short routes. On the next slide, you can click through the animation twice, please. Thank you. Once more. So that's just to reiterate, depot charging will be the beginning for this eActros, for this 200-kilometer vehicle. And there's a bunch of use cases that can be used for example, delivering groceries to the stores at the grocery stores and supermarkets. And that would be quite an interesting use case already because, of course, the cities are fairly densely populated, so you want to keep emissions out of those. And that's what this vehicle is perfect for. On the next slide, we will see the bit of the asks that we have. So our customers, their job is to deliver goods, right? So they think about the vehicle. They're used to thinking about the vehicle primarily. Diesel was readily available. But when we talk about electrification and depot electrification, we need to think a bit beyond that, and they really have to enter this e-mobility world, and we need to help them with that. And the DSOs and TSOs are also responsible for helping them with that. So chargers is of course one aspect. The other aspect is where electricity comes from, so renewable electricity preferably. So attractive, cost-effective energy pricing and tariffs must be available that can deliver such quality and to a respectable price. And when we talk about price, I also would hope that we've heard so much about flexibility today already and demand side management, smart charging, vehicle to grid, that at some point the customer will benefit from that as well. And our customers, our logistics customers, they are quite scheduled in their logistics, right? So they will get to the depot at a certain pre-specified time, and then these vehicles stand around for a bunch of the afternoon, but maybe also during the night, and that just really depends on the different use cases. So I'm assuming that there would be a lot of flexibility there, and we are right now in the process of conducting discussions with German transmission system operators as well to specify how much flexibility would be available from these vehicles. And the last aspect goes pretty much directly at the DSOs. So our customers, of course, have to rely on a reliable and affordable grid connection. So again, of course, that costs money. That's fine. That has to be done. It costs time as well. So when our customers think about electrifying, they will think about the vehicle first that will be delivered in half a year tops. And then the grid connection has to be in place. So we really need to make sure to use every means available to speed up the grid connection. You see on the right-hand side, just for an exemplary use case, an exemplary grid connection for chargers, photovoltaics and battery storage, the timelines that different DSOs in these countries have reported back to us. And as you see, it widely varies. And that's due to processes and due to regulation, of course. And that's something that we would really like to promote, that maybe that can be accelerated in some ways, something to discuss. Another point is getting information to the customer. I'm almost done, David, sorry. Getting information to the customer on what their site specifically has available in terms of capacity. Right now, of course, you usually give a bit of a request to the DSO, what is available, and then there's a bit of a discussion. Maybe there can be expert talk hotlines or something like that, where our customer can ring up ahead of time, get information on their specific site, and also discuss how in the long term they would like to electrify. So if they're thinking about 2 vehicles now, there won't be a lot of strain on the grid, but if they're talking about 50 vehicles in the future with 100 kilowatt charging each, that'll be a lot of energy needed at that site and a lot of power needed at that site, and the DSO will have to prepare for that in time. And there's right now very little platform for this kind of discussion. Another topic could be like a Google Maps kind of thing or grid availability. So you can look where your depot is. Maybe you have multiple depots, see where they are, and then see what the available capacity of these sites are. Probably a problem with disclosing this information publicly. I can understand that, but maybe that's a way of approaching this topic. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion. Thank you much for the attention, and yeah, thanks, David.
Thank you very much, Christian. I will ask everybody to put on the camera, and in the meantime, while we're waiting for the others to come online, Christian, just one question from the slide do is that you were talking about DC charging. Is there no AC charging for trucks in your presentation? We didn't see it, so can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, we're really focusing on DC charging. There's some for smaller vehicles, so 7.5 tons like that. They have an AC charger because they have smaller batteries. But if we're talking about 300 kilowatt hour plus, we really need the DC charging to get the high powers going.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I do have a question on electrical vehicle for the panelists. I think the first one, and I see some questions around that coming in Slido as well, is it like, what do you need most? So for example, do we need more faster charging, or do we need smarter charging? So there's a challenge between those two, and I will ask a couple of you to react on that. Antonio, you raised your hand, but I also will come to Lucy and Christian. But Antonio, go ahead. You're mute. We come to you, Antonio. Anyone, somebody else already wants to react to this?
Yes, maybe I can start, David. I think we need smart charging all the time. That's for sure. And we need, by default, I would say, probably slow charging, but whenever needed, and also for customer acceptance, this is really important to also have fast charging. So fast charging should not be the default way of charging, but it should be available enough so that the customer also feel comfortable and confident with the trips they can make, and confident also with the fact that they would not face any specific difficulty charging also maybe at the last minute for some reasons they may have. So I would say the balance is difficult to define, but for sure we need both.
Thank you, Lucy.
Can you hear
Antonio.
me now? Yes,
yep.
But I was saying ladies first, so that would be the same. Yes, the simple answer is yes, we need both. Actually, we need a lot of use cases, and I would say fast charging is surely necessary for some category, for long haul delivery, for example, and for sudden needs you may have when you travel, even with a small car. But then we need, I don't know if call it slow charging. Actually, is long charging. We need to exploit the fact that a lot of vehicles are idle most of the time, 90-95%. There were interesting studies in Belgium, in France, showing this kind of a percentage. So just to share with the car owner the fact that he will not completely be mastering the time when he plugs in and off, but for a certain time, that is a contract, it will be rewarded. He gives this resource to the system. So the point is we need a very smart control, and it shall not be only controlled by the grid operator. It has to be, probably it will be done by specific actor providing this service, and the grid operators have to provide the signals, market signals or price signals, fast enough to exploit the profile to go up and down. So we need to exploit all the parking, and we are so it's not only coupling with the transport. We have to couple our needs with the parking facilities, and this it's a totally new sector for us, because there are different needs, different decision-making processes, and different decisional actors there. We need both.
Thank
and
you,
again, we need many use cases.
Thank you, Antonio. Just a question for Gerlie. Sorry, how did you take this into your study you presented, or what's your view on the question like fast charging versus smarter charging? Because I know from my own studies that it makes a big difference in the investment side.
The conclusions are the same. Smart charging, all the life you need fast charging, but the DSO has to be allowed to work in a new way, because if we stay in a passive situation and in adapting the infrastructure capacity, as I told before, one fast charging place is like a whole building. You can't be able to fill all the city of these infrastructures without have the possibility to decide and to make a regulation of the loads at what hour you can charge your car and so on. So the smart charging goes in this way.
Maybe I can add to that.
Yep.
David, that's all right. So for commercial customers, of course, the smart charging is interesting because maybe they can reduce their electricity costs, right? That's something that they want to help you with, basically, right? But of course, it can't impact their dealings. If their logistic routes are impacted by that, then that'll be a no-go. So we need to find ways to have low impact with decent use, right? So that you can get a benefit out of it without impacting the customer at all. And that's much more important than for passenger cars, because they need to earn money with these vehicles on a daily basis. There's very low margins in logistics. And if we need them to electrify and want to use their flexibility, which does exist, I'm really sure about that, then we need to find good solutions there.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Maybe another question for the group. What are the key market design changes we need to gear up a system integration? So are there any regulations or changes in the market design you will need if you want to increase the speed of system integration? Somebody who wants to react to that first? No? I think Antonio, but his screen is faced, is frozen. Christian, do you have any view on that, on the market design? Because you have a view on different countries, so I can imagine that there are the differences between countries, etc.
Yeah. So when coming back to the flexibility topic, right? If we find in some markets, UK, Finland, for example, that vehicle to grid is already a thing, so that would be places where regulation is already in place to kind of get these markets going. But then, of course, they're mostly small pilot projects or just limited availability. But other countries don't have regulation in place at all, and then it'll be a very long challenge for this kind of platform vehicle to grid be a reality. And the problem is, when we're starting these things now, it'll take time to seep through to the customers, right? They will have to adapt to this new world as well and be prepared to get involved in it. And if we lose a lot of time now setting up these markets, then that'll just hurt us in the long run, because there's a delay in the system.
So there's the motivation to speed up.
I'm just echoing other people today, unfortunately. A lot of men want that already.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got one question from the Slido for Lucy. There's a question whether we need to move to railway transportation in order to make to get the CO2 reduction targets, to make them. What's your view on that, Lucy? If you see that, is it all electrifying our transportation, or it's more to railway transportation?
Well, in 2.0, we work on electrification. That's a very clear focus. We work only on zero tailpipe emission solutions, so for vehicle, but also for new mobility systems. But if we want to achieve the objective, long-term objective of climate neutrality, we need a very broad portfolio of solutions that will include, of course, strongly electrification, but everything that can be done should be done to achieve the objectives. So I hope I answered to the question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lucy. So let me stick to the schedule, and we used the 10 minutes earlier. We used it rightly. So thank you very much, everybody, for this for your contribution. I think we've seen very interesting space of system integration, from electrical vehicles on the grid edge, slow charging, fast charging, but also the customer, the role of the customer in system integration. But also very interesting to see system integration about different energy carriers, to say, like electricity, gas, and heat, and how the interplay works together. So I think we touched a lot of topics on system integration in just an hour on this beautiful Friday. I want to give Roberto the floor for his closing remarks. So please,
yes,
Roberto.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you to all the panelists here, extraordinarily present for this discussion. And thank you very much, because you really brought your real experience. Anyway, a couple of slides still arrived. And there is a question that I would like anyway to put to this panel. Pankaj Kela from Sumitomo asks, charging depots for electric trucks, typically, who is expected to invest in this infrastructure? We can leave this question open, but certainly it will be conditional in the evolution of faster charging on one way, and certainly for the evolution of the whole electric mobility. One word from everyone on this. Christian, what do you think?
Depot charging the customer, and that's going to be a challenge for them, and public charging, mobility service providers who can benefit from high power charging.
David, do you agree with these active roles from the actors?
Yes, and I think I would add to that that the DSO should invest in the capacity of the full grid. So it's end-to-end.
Lucy.
I don't think I can add much to this point. I think we really need to have everyone on board, and of course public charging deployment is also a very important aspect. Yeah.
We have got another DSO on the screen. Francesco, what is your opinion on this?
We would be happy to put it in the regulatory asset base. It's not possible now, but I think it could be a good way to incentive the development of the infrastructure.
Thank you very much for this comment. Antonio, from your point of view.
But also as a car user, we need private and public both. Private as much as it is feasible according to the morphology, the topology of buildings and of cities, but also the public ones, because we will move from one to the other, and the car driver will have to choose, and we have to give him this possibility to choose. And this is the missing, the big gap to deploy faster the electromobility. We really think so. Because everything else is there, technology, batteries, the cars, everything is there. We just miss charging infrastructure deployed.
Thank you very much, Antonio. So, and Mr. Kela, your question gave me the opportunity to summarize, in the words of others, the wrap-up of this InnoGrid session. With respect to all of the panelists that have been there, but the title was Regulation Can Rhyme with Innovation. We have been developing this topic quite clearly, and we see here that a good cooperation, TSOs, DSOs, and institutional body is there, and that will develop according to the guidelines that Kadri Simson kindly gave us live at the opening of this webinar. As far as this webinar is concerned, the presentations that you have seen on screen are linked in the websites of EDSO and ENTSO-E in the next few hours, and then the recording of this webinar will also be available. I do thank you very much for your participation. It was long, but in my opinion, extremely interesting. It was a good opening of the 10th year edition of InnoGrid. I invite you to be there in 1 week time on the 11th, next Friday, just to get acquainted with all the cutting-edge projects that involve DSOs and TSOs to deliver that transition that David is trying to deliver as well for a salary. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice weekend. Hopefully not too wet in Northern Europe, hopefully not too hot in Southern Europe. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.